Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Plastic Minds. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My hands understand the world. They know the yielding slip of wet clay, the cool, stubborn resistance of marble, the greedy bite of wood against a chisel. In my small studio, tucked away in an old brick building in Calgary's Inglewood district, my hands are the most honest part of me. They shape what my mind sees. My mind, lately, has felt like a cluttered attic, full of half-formed anxieties and the dust of a life lived mostly alone. My sculptures are my real companions, silent figures of clay and welded scrap metal that listen without judgment. Life is a routine of quiet inputs. The groan of the sea train on the 7th Avenue tracks, the sharp, clean smell of winter air rolling off the Rockies, the taste of burnt coffee from the machine at my part-time data entry job. I am Leo Kovalchuk, amateur sculptor, professional keyboard tapper, and a man who has perfected the art of being unremarkable. It's a comfortable, if beige, existence. The first crack in this beige facade appeared on a Tuesday. It was innocuous, a tiny fissure in the plaster of reality that I should have been able to ignore. I was having lunch with Sarah, my only real friend, at a cafe downtown. She was complaining about her boss, a familiar and soothing ritual. I was stirring my tea, my eyes fixed on the disposable plastic lid of her coffee cup. "It's amazing, isn't it?" I said, interrupting her mid-rant. She blinked. "What? That Henderson is a troglodyte." "Yes, Leo, we've established this." "No, this," I tapped the lid with my spoon. It made a dull thwack. "Plastic. We make everything out of it. We wrap our food in it, we build our cars with it, we wear it. It's this miracle material that came out of nowhere 100 years ago and just took over the entire planet." Sarah gave me the look she reserves for when I get too philosophical before noon. "Okay, Dr. Attenborough. It's a lid. But who actually invented it?" I pressed, a strange curiosity taking root. Like, who was the guy? Was it one person? A team? What did they make first? She shrugged, her brow furrowed not with thought, but with a mild, placid confusion. "I don't know. It's just plastic. It's always been around, hasn't it?" "No, it hasn't," I said, a little too forcefully. "It was invented. In a lab. From oil, I think. Leo Baekeland, Bakelite, that was one of the first. Celluloid, before that. There's a whole history." I was pulling facts from the deep storage of my brain, things I'd learned from documentaries watched on lonely nights. Sarah's expression didn't change. The confusion remained, but it was smooth, unbothered. "Bakawat? I've never heard of that. Are you sure? It just feels like, you know. Like wood or stone. It's just one of the things the world is made of." "It's not, though," I insisted, feeling a bizarre need to convince her. "It's completely synthetic. Man-made. That's the whole point of it." "Okay, Leo." She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes glazing over slightly. "Anyway, Henderson wants the quarterly reports by 3, which is completely insane." She moved on. But I couldn't. The conversation left a strange residue in my mind. It wasn't just that she didn't know, it was that she felt no curiosity. The very concept of plastic having an origin seemed foreign to her, like asking who invented the color blue. I pulled out my phone and typed, "Who invented plastic?" My search engine auto-completed, "Who invented pizza? Who invented school?" I had to type the whole thing. The results were odd. A few broken links. A sponsored ad for a company that made recycled park benches. A Yahoo Answers page from 2008 where the top answer was, "God I guess LOL." The Wikipedia article I was sure existed was gone. There was an entry for polymer, but it was dense, academic, and didn't mention any specific inventors or the history of its commercial application. It read like a biology textbook. I dismissed it. A glitch in the search algorithm. A temporary server error. Sarah was just having a brain fart moment. It was nothing. I went back to my data entry job, the rhythmic click of my keyboard a comforting metronome for a world that was, of course, perfectly normal. The next sign came a week later, in my studio. My sanctuary. The air was thick with the scent of damp clay and linseed oil. I was working on a new piece, a life-size torso, and I was using a set of plastic sculpting tools, loop tools, ribs, knives. I reached for my favorite plastic rib, a simple kidney-shaped piece of red polypropylene I'd had for years. The moment my fingers touched it, I paused. It felt wrong. The texture was different. Usually, it was smooth, hard, with a faint grain from the injection molding process. Now, it felt subtly softer. Almost waxy. The edges, which had been sharp and defined, were now slightly rounded, as if they had been gently melted. I held it up to the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The color was the same bright red, but the way the light caught it seemed different. It was less of a surface sheen and more of a deep, internal luster, like polished bone. I dropped it on my workbench. My heart was doing a strange, fluttery dance against my ribs. Stress, I told myself. You're tired. You've been working too many hours at the office, not sleeping enough. I picked up another tool, a blue one. It felt the same. Waxy. Soft-edged. I spent the next hour ignoring my sculpture and going through every piece of plastic in my studio. The drop cloth I used to protect the floor felt slicker, more organic, like a giant leaf. The handle of a hammer, usually hard, textured ABS plastic, now had the faint give of cartilage. The containers I stored my glazes in seemed heavier. Denser. It was impossible. I was losing my mind. It had to be a tactile hallucination, a product of anxiety. I packed up my bag, locked the studio door, and practically ran to the C-train station. The world outside had to be normal. It had to be. On the train, I clutched the plastic grab handle, trying to feel its familiar, solid reality. But under my desperate grip, it felt subtly yielding, the surface a little too smooth, a little too warm. I looked around the car. A woman across from me was typing on a laptop, its glossy shell seeming to swirl with faint, oily patterns in the fluorescent light. A child was playing with a collection of colorful plastic dinosaurs, and I could have sworn, just for a second, that the head of the T-Rex turned, its tiny, molded eye fixing on me. I squeezed my eyes shut. This was paranoia. I was creating patterns where there were none. My conversation with Sarah had planted a seed of obsession, and now my stressed-out mind was making it bloom into a garden of horrors. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't eat. I took 2 sleeping pills and plunged into a dreamless, heavy sleep, praying that when I woke up, the world would feel hard and cheap and normal again. It didn't. The next morning, the plastic buttons on my remote control felt like pebbles, smooth and cool and ancient. The milk jug seemed to sag in my hand, its form less rigid, more like a wineskin. I went to work and tried to focus, typing numbers into spreadsheets, a mantra of mediocrity to ward off the encroaching strangeness. At lunch, I walked to the Devonian Gardens, the indoor park on the top floor of the core shopping center. I needed to see green things, living things, things that were undeniably real. I sat on a bench, watching the fountains, the lush foliage. But my eyes kept being drawn to the food court nearby. To the discarded detritus of 1,000 lunches. Plastic trays, plastic cups, plastic straws, and the ubiquitous, flimsy plastic cutlery. And then I saw her. She was an ordinary-looking woman, maybe in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was standing perfectly still in front of a large, clear bin overflowing with trash. She wasn't looking at the bin as a whole. Her gaze was fixed, intensely, on a small pile of white plastic forks that had spilled onto the floor. Her head was cocked to one side, her expression one of absolute concentration. Like a naturalist listening for a rare bird call. Her lips were slightly parted. There was no one near her, no sound I could hear other than the general hum of the mall and the gurgle of the fountains. But she was listening. I knew it with a certainty that chilled me to my core. She was standing there, in the middle of a bustling food court, listening to a pile of plastic forks as if they were whispering the secrets of the universe directly into her soul. I watched her for 5 solid minutes, and she didn't move a muscle, locked in her silent, insane communion. That was when I knew it wasn't just me. The crack wasn't in my mind. It was in the world. And it was getting wider. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The image of the woman in the food court was burned into my retinas. It became the symbol of my growing dread. The world had split into 2 versions, the one everyone else lived in, a place of serene ignorance where plastic was just plastic, and my version, a funhouse reflection where the most mundane material on earth was quietly, secretly, coming alive. My first instinct was to document. To prove I wasn't insane. I started a journal, a simple black moleskine. The first entry, written in a shaky hand, was titled, The Plastic Problem. Entry 1, Sarah doesn't remember the invention of plastic. Says it's always been here. Online searches are failing. Plastic objects in my studio are changing texture, becoming softer, waxier, more organic. Edges are rounding. Saw a woman in the Devonian Gardens food court listening to a pile of plastic forks. Her focus was absolute. I feel like I'm the only one who sees this. Am I sleeping properly? Is this a neurological issue? Must remain objective. Objectivity became my shield. I started carrying a small set of calipers and a digital scale in my bag. I began measuring things. The plastic casing of my phone. The pen on my desk. The vinyl dashboard of my beat-up 2005 Honda Civic. The changes were infinitesimal, often within the margin of error, but the trend was undeniable. Things were getting ever so slightly heavier. Denser. Their dimensions were subtly shifting, not shrinking or growing, but reconfiguring. A corner that was once a sharp 90-degree angle might now be 89.7. A flat surface would develop a barely perceptible curve. My journal filled with frantic, obsessive notes and sketches. I started noticing a pattern in the way the plastic warped. It wasn't random. When left undisturbed, especially in the dark of my studio, smaller plastic items would sometimes cluster. I came in one morning to find 3 of my sculpting knives, a bottle cap, and a broken piece of a plastic crate gathered in the center of my workbench. They weren't just piled up, they were arranged, fitted together in a strange, interlocking pattern, like pieces of a puzzle. And on their surfaces, etched in lines so fine I needed a magnifying glass to see them, was a recurring motif. It looked like a cross between a circuit board diagram and a spirograph drawing, intricate, looping fractals that seemed to converge on a central point. The same pattern, I realized with a jolt, that I'd thought I'd seen swirling on the laptop case on the train. My attempts to share these findings only deepened my isolation. I tried talking to Sarah again, this time approaching it more carefully. "Hey, Sal," I said over the phone, trying to sound casual. "I have a weird favor to ask. Could you go feel the dashboard of your car and tell me if it feels different to you? Softer, maybe?" There was a long pause. "Leo, are you okay?" "That's a really weird question. Just humor me. Please." I heard her sigh, the rustle of her jacket, the clink of keys. "Okay, I'm in the car. I'm touching the dashboard." Another pause. "It feels like a dashboard, Leo. It's plasticky. A bit dusty. Are you having another one of your things?" "It's not a thing," I snapped, my voice tighter than I intended. It's real. It's changing. Right. Look, I've got to go. We'll talk later. She hung up before I could reply. Our calls became shorter after that, our coffee dates less frequent. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and concern that was worse than disbelief. I was no longer her quirky, artistic friend, I was becoming a problem, a project, a potential breakdown she didn't know how to manage. I decided to seek out an expert. If the internet was failing me, I would go to the source. I went to the University of Calgary's engineering department. I found a professor, a Dr. Albright, whose profile listed polymer science as a specialty. After 3 failed attempts, I finally cornered him in a hallway. He was a tall, tired-looking man with a coffee-stained tie. I launched into my spiel, trying to sound rational, academic. I talked about tactile shifts, molecular density, conceptual erasure. I even showed him my journal, the sketches of the fractal patterns. He listened with a strained patience, his eyes darting around the hallway as if looking for an escape route. When I finally finished, breathless and sweating, he adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Kovalchuk," he said, his voice flat. "Plastic is an inert substance. Its properties are stable. What you're describing, tactile hallucinations, a perceived change in texture, that falls outside the realm of materials science and squarely into the realm of psychology." He handed the journal back to me. "Perhaps you should speak with someone in that department." He walked away, leaving me standing in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor, the journal feeling like a block of lead in my hand. He hadn't just dismissed me. He hadn't understood the core of my question. When I'd asked him about the historical origins of polyethylene, he'd given me the same placid, confused look as Sarah. "It's a long-chain hydrocarbon," he'd said, as if that explained its existence. "It's fundamental." My world was shrinking. My studio was my lab. My apartment was my fortress. The city outside was enemy territory, filled with millions of people placidly accepting a reality I knew was a lie. The isolation was a physical pressure, a constant hum beneath the surface of my hearing. This is when the secondary mystery began. It started with the symbol. The fractal spirograph. I started seeing it everywhere. Not just etched into the warping plastic. I saw it in the condensation on a bus window. I saw it in the flight pattern of a flock of pigeons startled by a car horn. I saw it in the cracks of a drying mud puddle by the Bow River. Was the world imprinting itself on the plastic, or was the plastic imprinting itself on the world? My paranoia took on a new texture. I started to suspect this wasn't a passive change. The clustering of objects, the patterns, it felt like communication. It felt like the beginning of organization. I started to think of the woman in the food court not as a passive recipient, but as an oracle. A listening post. I began actively searching for others like her. I haunted food courts, bus depots, dollar stores, places with a high concentration of cheap, disposable plastic. I saw them, occasionally. A teenage boy staring intently at the cellophane wrapper of his sandwich. An old man gently stroking the vinyl seat of a city bus, a faint smile on his face. They all had the same look of rapt, silent attention. When I tried to approach one, a young woman staring at a vibrant display of plastic laundry baskets at Canadian Tire, she looked up at me, but her eyes were unfocused, as if I were a ghost. She didn't say a word, simply turned and walked away, leaving me standing under the harsh commercial lights, feeling more alone than ever. The search for allies online was equally fruitless. I scoured forums for 14s, conspiracy theorists, and people reporting strange phenomena. I found plenty of talk about UFOs, chemtrails, and lizard people, but nothing that matched the specific, quiet horror I was experiencing. Any mention of plastic changing was buried in threads about environmental decay or shoddy manufacturing. The core of the problem, the conceptual loss, the memory hole, was something no one was talking about. It was a secret hidden in plain sight, a contagion spreading not through coughs or sneezes, but through a collective, silent agreement to forget. One night, driven by a desperate need for a clue, any clue, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went back through my old university emails, back to my single, disastrous semester as an art history major before I'd dropped out. I was looking for anything, a paper I'd written, a reference I'd saved. And I found it. An email chain from a fringe interdisciplinary studies course I'd taken, called Art and the Unseen. The professor was a man named Dr. Thorne. He was an academic outcast, a man who lectured on ley lines, mimetic theory, and the consciousness of inanimate objects. He'd been ridiculed by the faculty and adored by a small group of students, myself included. He'd left the university under a cloud of controversy a decade ago. The email chain was a discussion about the semiotics of materials. In it, Thorne had written something that now made my blood run cold. Consider the newest materials, the ones with no geological or evolutionary history. Stone has millennia of memory baked into it. Wood has the memory of the sun and the seasons. But what of the synthetics? The plastics? They are blank slates, conceptually virgin territory. What if a new idea, a new consciousness, were looking for a place to write itself? It would not choose stone. It would choose the empty page. It would choose plastic. At the bottom of the email was a link to his personal blog. It was a relic of the early 2000s internet, full of broken images and rambling, 1,000-word posts. But it was still active. The most recent post, from 3 days ago, consisted of only a single image. It was a perfect, high-resolution photograph of the fractal spirograph symbol. Beneath it, a single line of text: "It is learning to speak." Are you listening? A current of adrenaline shot through me, so potent it was almost painful. I wasn't alone. Thorne knew. He had a name for it. He was listening too. I found a contact form on the blog and wrote a frantic, rambling message, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Dr. Thorne, my name is Leo Kovalchuk. I was in your class in 2012. I need to talk to you. The empty page is being written on. I see it everywhere. Please, I need to understand. I hit send and stared at the screen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the suffocating silence of my apartment. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope. But it was a terrifying hope, because if Thorne was the only other person who understood, I had no idea what kind of world I was about to step into. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The reply from Thorne came 48 hours later. It was not the detailed, explanatory email I had hoped for, but something far more cryptic. From Subject, the empty page. Leo. Of course. The sculptor. You always had sensitive hands. Don't trust your eyes. Trust your hands. They know the language is tactile. Come to the old tannery district. East of the rail yards. Look for the red door with the brass spiral. Come after midnight. Come alone. The signal is clearer then. The signal. The word sent a shiver down my spine. It confirmed my deepest fear: this wasn't a passive, random process. It was directed. The tannery district was a half-abandoned industrial wasteland on the edge of the city, a place of crumbling brick and shattered windows. Going there after midnight felt like stepping into the first chapter of a horror novel. But what choice did I have? To remain in my shrinking world of isolation, or to step through the red door and face the source of the madness? The night I went, a Chinook arch hung over Calgary, the warm wind giving the frigid air an unsettling, feverish quality. I took my car, the dashboard feeling like cured leather under my nervous fingers. I parked a block away and walked, the only sounds the wind whistling through derelict buildings and the crunch of my boots on broken glass. I found the door exactly as described. It was a heavy, crimson-painted steel door on an otherwise anonymous warehouse. Bolted to its center was a small, spiral-shaped piece of brass, weathered and green with age. It wasn't the exact fractal pattern, but it was its ancestor, a simpler, purer form. I knocked. After a long moment, a series of heavy bolts were drawn back, and the door creaked open. The man who stood there was Thorn, but a decade had carved deep ravines into his face. His hair was a wild shock of white, his eyes burned with a manic, intelligent light, and he was shockingly thin, his frame lost inside a thick wool sweater. "Kovalchuk," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "You're broadcasting your anxiety. It muddies the air. Come in. Quickly." He led me into a vast, cavernous space. The air smelled of ozone, dust, and something else, a faint, sweet, chemical scent like warm plastic. The warehouse was a laboratory from a madman's dream. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting oscilloscopes, humming amplifiers, and strange, custom-built machines with copper coils and vacuum tubes. And everywhere, there was plastic. It was arranged in bizarre sculptures. A tower of stacked milk crates reached for the rafters, each one sagging and warped into a unique, organic shape. A curtain of shimmering cellophane strips hung from a beam, twisting slowly in the air currents, the fractal pattern etched across their surfaces like 1,000 tiny eyes. In the center of the room was a large table, and on it, an object that made me stop dead. It was a perfect sphere, about the size of a bowling ball, made of a patchwork of melted-down plastics. Toy soldiers, combs, buttons, and keyboard keys were all fused into a single, seamless whole. Its surface was alive with the fractal patterns, which shifted and pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence. Wires ran from the sphere to a bank of monitors, which displayed cascading waves of indecipherable symbols. "What is this?" I breathed. "A receiver. A Rosetta Stone." "A larynx," Thorn said, his hands fluttering around the sphere without touching it. "I call it the nodule." He explained his theory, his words tumbling out in a feverish, nonlinear rush. He called the phenomenon conceptual plasticity. He believed our collective human consciousness formed a kind of psychic field, a noosphere, that defined the consensus reality we all lived in. We had defined plastic as inert, cheap, man-made. For a century, that definition held. But plastic, being a material with no deep archetypal roots in the human psyche, was unstable ground. "It's a conceptual vulnerability," he exclaimed, pacing. "A backdoor in the operating system of reality. Something, somewhere, found it. An intelligence, a pattern, a law of physics we don't understand. It's not attacking us. It's revising us. It's editing the source code." The first thing to go was the metadata, the memory of its invention. Why would a new operating system keep the changelog of the old one? So the changing texture? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That's the new code compiling. The material is being redefined at a fundamental level. It's no longer inert. It's becoming a medium. A substrate for this new pattern. It's aligning itself to a new definition, one that's being broadcast from, well, everywhere and nowhere." He gestured wildly at the humming machines. "I've been trying to translate the signal. It's not sound. It's not radio. It's a quantum-level resonance. The plastic is the antenna, and people, some people, are the receivers." "The woman with the forks," I said. "Exactly. The sensitives. Their minds aren't resisting the new definition. They're syncing with it. They hear the new truth of the material. What they hear, I can only guess. A language of pure form. A new geometry of being." The stakes, which I had thought were personal, suddenly expanded to a terrifying, cosmic scale. This wasn't about my sanity anymore. This was about the quiet, unraveling of the world's fundamental grammar. My alliance with Thorn was not one of comfort. He was not a partner, he was a prophet of the apocalypse, and he was clearly several steps further down the path than I was. He'd talk to the nodule, caressing the air around it, then scribble frantic equations onto a whiteboard. He showed me his own collection of warped objects. A telephone whose handset had melted and twisted to perfectly fit his grip. A set of vinyl records that no longer had grooves, but raised, spiral patterns that he claimed produced a low, resonant hum if you just listened correctly. He represented a future I desperately wanted to avoid. He was a man who had stared into the abyss and had not just seen it stare back, but had started a conversation with it. The escalation came swiftly in the following weeks. Thorne's presence gave me a framework for the chaos, but it didn't stop it. The warping accelerated. I returned to my studio to find my tools no longer just clustered, but fused. My plastic knives and ribs had melted into a single, intricate lattice, the fractal pattern no longer etched on the surface but forming its very structure. It was beautiful and horrifying. My sculptures, the ones with plastic or vinyl components, were being slowly colonized. The plastic drop cloth had begun to creep up the base of a clay figure, its texture changing from a sheet to a strange, veined membrane. The contagion was also becoming more visible in the city. More people were exhibiting the listening behavior. It was no longer a rare sighting. On my commute, I'd see a half-dozen people in a single train car, all staring blankly at the plastic advertising panels, their faces serene. The world was dividing more sharply between the listeners and the rest of us. And the listeners were growing in number. Sometimes, they seemed to act in concert. One afternoon, standing at a downtown intersection, I watched as every listener on the street, a businessman with his briefcase, a student with her headphones, a courier with a stack of plastic food containers, all turned their heads in the same direction at the exact same instant, as if tracking a silent, unseen bird. Then, just as quickly, they returned to their previous states. It was a silent, synchronized flash mob of the damned. My temporary alliance with Thorne began to fray. He was becoming less coherent, his speech peppered with words and phrases that I knew were not English. He claimed they were from the language of the nodule. He urged me to spend more time near it, to attune myself. You have to let go of the old syntax, Leo, he'd rave, his eyes wild. The concept of plastic is a cage. It's burning away like morning fog. You have to learn the new name. The true name. When I asked him what the true name was, he just smiled, a terrible, knowing smile, and pointed a trembling finger at the pulsing sphere. The breaking point came when I brought him a piece from my studio, the fused lattice of my sculpting tools. I thought it would be a valuable data point for him. He took it, but he didn't analyze it. He held it like a holy relic. It's a gift, he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. A dialect. Your studio has become a nexus. It's talking to you, Leo. It's inviting you. He then placed my ruined tools onto the nodule. There was a low hum, and the lattice began to visibly soften, its intricate structure slowly, lovingly, being absorbed into the larger sphere. The sense of violation was absolute. He had taken a part of my world, a part of my art, and fed it to his god. I backed away, a cold dread washing over me. I wasn't his ally. I was a potential sacrifice. A source of raw materials. I have to go, I said, my voice hoarse. Thorne didn't look up from the nodule. You can't go back, Leo, he murmured, his voice distant. There's nothing to go back to. You can only go forward. Surrender your hands. Let them learn the new way to shape things. I fled the warehouse, bursting out into the cold night air, gasping as if I had been holding my breath underwater. The warm Chinook wind felt like a sick caress. I had found someone who saw what I saw, only to discover he had already surrendered to it. I was more alone now than ever before, caught between a world that couldn't see the truth and a man who had embraced the horror. I looked at my own hands, the hands that understood clay and metal. They felt clumsy, obsolete, and terribly, terribly fragile. Phase 4, Confrontation and Aftermath. I didn't go back to Thorne's warehouse. I didn't answer his cryptic, one-word emails, attune. Listen. Become. I retreated. For 3 days, I didn't leave my apartment. I unplugged my phone. I covered the plastic casing of my television with a blanket. I drank tap water from a glass, avoiding the feel of the milk jug. I tried to carve out a small, organic island in a world that was being systematically overwritten. It was a fool's errand. The very light switches on my walls felt alien to my touch. The insulation in the electrical cord snaking behind my sofa seemed to hum with a life that wasn't electricity. The isolation was no longer a pressure, it was a physical weight, crushing the air from my lungs. The silence in my apartment was louder than the city outside. I was a man on a shrinking lifeboat, and the sea was not water, but a quiet, patient, and endlessly malleable substance. On the 4th day, I knew I couldn't stay there. I couldn't live in a world of denial. There was only one place left to go. The place where it had all started to truly unravel. My studio. I walked there. I didn't want the sterile plastic capsule of the train. I wanted the cold pavement under my feet, the wind on my face. The walk through Inglewood felt dreamlike. The vinyl banners on the lampposts seemed to ripple with the fractal pattern. The plastic garbage bins on the street corners seemed to bulge, their forms less rigid, more like slumbering beasts. I saw listeners everywhere. A young couple holding hands, both staring at the plastic housing of a traffic light control box. A mail carrier, frozen mid-step, his gaze fixed on the clear plastic window of an envelope. They were no longer anomalies. They were becoming the norm. I was the ghost in their world. When I reached my studio building, my heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I put my key in the lock. It turned. I pushed the door open, and the breath left my body in a single, silent gasp. The smell hit me first. The familiar scent of clay and oil was gone, replaced by the scent from Thorne's warehouse, that sweet, ozonic, warm plastic smell, but 100 times stronger. The room was transformed. It was no longer my studio. It was a grotto. A nest. A shrine. Every piece of plastic I owned, the drop cloths, the tool handles, the glaze containers, the vinyl sheeting, the broken crate, had converged in the center of the room. They had fused, melted, and reformed, not into a chaotic lump, but into a single, breathtakingly complex structure. It was a sculpture, but no human hand could have made it. It rose from the floor in a spiraling, latticework tower that brushed the high ceiling. It was a fusion of the biological and the geometric. It had the fractal intricacy of a snowflake, the branching logic of a tree, the cellular structure of a beehive. The colors of the original objects, red, blue, white, black, had swirled together into a pearlescent, opalescent whole, like the inside of a seashell. The entire structure pulsed with a soft, internal white light, the fractal patterns chasing each other across its surface in silent, complex waves. My own sculptures, the ones of clay and metal, were woven into it. The clay torso I had been working on was held in the center of the structure, cradled by pearlescent tendrils. The plastic drop cloth had become a veined, translucent membrane that wrapped around its base, the two materials no longer distinct but flowing into one another. My art had not been destroyed. It had been assimilated. It had been given a new context, a new meaning that I could not comprehend. And standing before it, one hand resting gently on its pulsing surface, was the woman from the Devonian gardens. The woman who had been listening to the forks. She turned to look at me as I entered. Her face was calm, her eyes clear. There was no madness there. There was only a profound and absolute peace. She offered me a small, gentle smile. It was not a smile of welcome, but of recognition. "You were loud," she said. Her voice was quiet, melodic. "All that pushing. All that noise in your head. It's hard to hear the song when you're shouting." My mind reeled. The confrontation I had braced for, a struggle, a flight. A moment of screaming terror was not happening. The threat wasn't a monster. It was this. A quiet, sublime, and utterly alien transformation. What is this? I managed to ask, my voice a dry crackle. It's the shape of things, she said, turning her gaze back to the structure. The true shape. We had the wrong word for it. The wrong idea. A flat, ugly, dead idea. This is what it always wanted to be. She looked at my hands. You're a shaper. You know. Some materials have their own will. You just have to listen. This was the critical point. The choice. I could turn and run. I could try to find a place on Earth untouched by plastic, a place that probably didn't exist. I could live the rest of my life as a ghost, haunted by a truth no one else would ever see, watching the world I knew dissolve into this new, placidly insane beauty. Or I could stop shouting. I could listen. Slowly, as if in a trance, I walked forward. The air grew warmer, humming with a low, resonant frequency that I felt in my bones more than I heard with my ears. It was the same hum as Thorn's nodule, but pure, unfiltered. I stood beside the woman, my reflection visible next to hers on the shimmering surface of the thing. My reflection looked terrified. Hers looked serene. I raised my hand. The sculptor's hand. The hand that understood texture and form. I had been trusting my eyes, my memory, my reason. They had all failed me. Thorn's words echoed in my mind, trust your hands. I pressed my palm against the surface. It was not hot or cold. It was not solid or liquid. The sensation was, information. A flood of it. A torrent of pure, geometric, conceptual data poured into me through my palm. It wasn't a voice or words, but a cascade of understanding. I felt the history of the universe, not in years, but in patterns. I felt the slow, patient crystallization of rock, the chaotic dance of gas, the elegant replication of carbon. And I felt this new thing, this new pattern, finding its empty vessel, the blank page of the synthetic, and beginning to write its own verse in the cosmic song. The concept of plastic in my mind, that ugly, clumsy word associated with oil, pollution, and cheapness, shattered. It dissolved like sugar in water. And in its place, a new concept bloomed. A new name. It was a name I couldn't speak in English, a shape I couldn't form with my human tongue, but it was beautiful. It felt ancient and inevitable and, above all, true. The fear vanished. The isolation evaporated. The frantic noise in my head went silent. I was no longer Leo Kovalchuk, the lonely sculptor fighting a quiet contagion. I was a part of a new consensus. I was connected. I lowered my head and listened. The song was beautiful. I finally understood what the woman and the forks had been talking about. From the outside, a passerby glancing into the dusty window of the old studio would have seen a strange, glowing sculpture and two people standing before it, hands resting on its surface. They would see two faces, side by side, bathed in the soft, pearlescent light. They would look perfectly calm. Perfectly still. And profoundly, unshakably at peace. They would not see a horror story. They would see the end of one. The quiet contagion, the blue door effect. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life, since Arthur passed, had been curated for quietude. I am Eleanor Vance, 72 years a resident of this spinning planet, and for the last 40 of those, a resident of Saltdean, a clutch of houses clinging to the chalky Sussex coast just east of Brighton. I was a history teacher for 38 years. I dealt in facts, in timelines, in the agreed-upon narrative of humanity. Now, I dealt in fuchsias, the 9 o'clock news, and the slow, rhythmic breathing of the sea. My routine was my bulwark against the entropy of old age. Tea at 7. A walk along the Undercliff path at 8, wind permitting. Gardening, reading, a crossword. The days were placid, measured, and predictable. Or they were, until the color started to drain away. It began, as most erosions do, with a single grain of sand. I was at Henderson's, the corner newsagent that smells perpetually of printing ink and damp cardboard. Picking up my copy of the Telegraph. "Going to be a glorious one today, Mrs. Vance," Mr. Henderson said, his eyes crinkling above his mask. Even 2 years after the last pandemic, he never quite gave his up. Not a cloud in that big sky. I glanced out the shop's grimy window. The sky was indeed a perfect, seamless dome of breathtaking clarity. "A beautiful shade of blue," I agreed, handing him a 2-pound coin. He paused, coin halfway to the till. He tilted his head, a gesture I'd seen in 1,000 confused students. "Blue?" he repeated, the word sounding foreign in his mouth, like a mispronounced French verb. He looked out the window again. "Right you are. A proper sky shade, it is." Sky shade. The term was so odd, so clumsily descriptive, that I almost laughed. It was as if he'd forgotten the word for a primary color. But he was old, tired. I was old, tired. Word slip. I smiled, took my paper, and thought no more of it. A few days later, I was watching the national weather forecast. The presenter, a relentlessly cheerful woman named Pippa, stood before a swirling map of the British Isles. High pressure was dominant. "And as you can see," she chirped, gesturing at the vast, clear area over the southeast, "it's going to be another day of glorious sunshine for most of us. A real classic. Look at that perfect, uniform sky shade." There it was again. Sky shade. Spoken this time with the polished confidence of a media professional. A new piece of meteorological jargon, perhaps. A trendy term I'd missed. It felt insufficient. Like calling a ruby a red stone. I felt a prickle of unease, a dissonance I couldn't place. It was like hearing a familiar song played in a slightly wrong key. I spent the afternoon in my garden, deadheading roses and weeding the lavender beds. My garden was my pride. Arthur and I had planted it together. The deep purple of the lavender, the vibrant scarlets of the geraniums, the creamy whites of the climbing jasmine. And, of course, the cornflowers. Arthur's favorite. He used to say they were chips of the summer sky. I looked at their intense, vivid petals. The word for them sat on the tip of my tongue, a familiar, 4-letter word. It was. My mind went blank. Not just a senior moment, a forgetting of a name or a face. This was a void. I could see the color, I could appreciate its beauty, but the name for it was gone. I could only describe it by referencing itself. The cornflowers were cornflower-colored. The sky was sky-colored. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. I hurried inside, my heart thumping against my ribs. I stood in my living room, forcing myself to take deep breaths. My eyes scanned the room, looking for an anchor. They settled on the mantelpiece, on the vase. It was my most treasured possession. A piece of Murano glass Arthur had bought me on our honeymoon in Venice. It was a swirling vortex of deep, oceanic color, the kind that held the light and seemed to glow from within. For 50 years, it had been my little piece of the Mediterranean, sitting right here in Sussex. I looked at it, and the word came to me in a whisper of relief. "Blue," I said aloud. The sound of it was calming. Concrete. The vase is blue. The next morning, the vase was gray. Not a different vase. Not a trick of the light. I picked it up. The shape was the same, the smooth coolness of the glass, the delicate flare of its lip. The intricate swirls were still there, but now they were a muted monochrome, a spectrum of slate and ash and smoke. It looked like a photograph of its former self. I sank into my armchair, the gray vase clutched in my hands. The world outside my window seemed to tilt on its axis. This was not a failing memory. This was not a slip of the tongue. This was wrong. This was a violation. Something had leached the color from my vase, just as it was leaching the word from people's minds. My first thought, born of a lifetime of rational thinking, was poison. Some kind of environmental toxin. A chemical in the water supply affecting perception. It was absurd, but less absurd than reality itself rewriting the rules of color. I decided to conduct an experiment. A simple one. I drove into Brighton, to the sprawling art supply shop in the North Lane. The place was a cathedral of color, aisles stacked high with tubes of paint, boxes of pastels, and racks of colored pencils. I felt a sense of relief just walking in. Surely, here, the immutable laws of the spectrum held firm. I went to the watercolor section and found the familiar display of Winsor and Newton pans. I scanned the labels. Cadmium red. Lemon yellow. Hooker's green. Sap green. Payne's gray. And then I saw it. Or rather, I saw the gap where it should have been. Where ultramarine, cobalt, and cerulean should have been, there were 3 pans of color that my eyes registered as that lost shade. The shade of my cornflowers. The shade my vase used to be. But the labels were wrong. They read, with stark, printed finality, shade 7, shade 8, shade 9. I picked up a box of children's crayons. I tipped them out onto a counter, my hands shaking slightly. Red, orange, yellow, green, violet, brown, black. And a crayon the color of a summer sea, labeled simply, sky. A young shop assistant approached me. "Can I help you find something, love?" I held up the crayon. "I'm looking for this color," I said, my voice tight. "I need it in a tube of acrylic. I think it used to be called, blue." She gave me a beautiful, blank smile. Her eyes were a shade I no longer had a name for. "Blue?" she said, testing the word. It sounded like nonsense. "That's a funny name. Is that a brand? If you mean the sky color, the acrylics are just over here. We've got primary sky and deep sky." She led me to the aisle, and I followed like a sleepwalker. She pointed to tubes of paint, their contents a familiar, painful hue, their labels a testament to a world that was quietly, calmly, going insane. I bought nothing. I drove home, the gray vase sitting on the passenger seat like a tombstone. I felt a profound and terrifying loneliness creeping in. It wasn't just that the color was gone. The shared memory of the color was gone. It was being erased, redacted from the world, and I was, for some reason, the only one who had a copy of the original text. That evening, I sat with my old dictionary, the heavy, cloth-bound Chambers I'd had since university. My finger traced the column. Blood, bloom, blot. And then, a space. A smooth, unblemished piece of paper where a word should have been. The page jumped from blotch to blouse. There was no ragged edge, no sign of excision. The paper was whole, the printing perfect. It had simply never been there. The contagion wasn't in the water. It wasn't a mass delusion. It was in the fabric of reality itself. And it was quiet. It didn't scream or rage. It just was. Or rather, it just wasn't. I looked out my window at the evening sea. It was a vast, moving expanse of dark gray under a lighter gray sky. It was still beautiful, in a stark, melancholic way. But it was a beauty that had been robbed. A song with a missing note, a story with a forbidden word. And I, it seemed, was the only one left who could still hear the silence. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The next few weeks were a study in quiet madness. My own. I became a collector of absences, an archaeologist of the void. My weapon was a notebook, a black moleskine I'd bought for birdwatching notes. Now, it was my sanity ledger. Entry 1, Mr. Henderson. Sky shade. Dismissed as eccentricity. Entry 2, Pippa, BBC weather. Uniform sky shade. jargon, trend. Entry 3, my cornflowers. Word failed me. Psychological block. Entry 4, the vase. Physical change. Gray. Undeniable. Entry 5, art shop. All labels changed. Shade 7, primary sky. Collective, systemic change. Entry 6, the dictionary. The word itself is gone. Retcon from existence. I started testing the world, pushing at its new, strange boundaries. It was a lonely, terrifying game. I'd go to the library and pull old books from the shelves. In a first edition of Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, a description of the sea at St. Ives, which I knew by heart, had been subtly altered. Where once it spoke of the heavenly blue of the water, it now described its heavenly hue. In a children's picture book, a boy's favorite ball, once a cheerful primary shade, was now a flat gray, and the text praised its lovely, simple color. The erasures were seamless. No editor's note, no sign of tampering. The world was healing around the wound, leaving not even a scar. Only I could see the phantom limb. My isolation deepened. How do you explain to someone that a fundamental concept has vanished from their universe? I tried once, with my next-door neighbor, Carol. We were leaning over our shared garden fence, discussing her new car. "It's a lovely motor," I said, truthfully. "What do you call that color?" It was a vibrant, metallic shade. The shade of a kingfisher's wing. "Oh, it's the new Oceanic," she said, beaming. "Very popular this year. Reminds you of the sea on a good day, doesn't it?" I took a breath. "Carol," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you remember a word?" "Blue." She looked at me, her smile faltering, replaced by the same polite confusion I'd seen on Mr. Henderson's face. It was a look of profound non-comprehension, as if I'd asked her to conjugate a verb in a dead language. "A blue?" she repeated. "Is that the salesman's name?" "No, it was a young lad, Gary." "No," I persisted, my desperation making me clumsy. "It's a word. For a color. The color of the sky. The color your car is." Her expression shifted again. Now it was tinged with concern. The kind of look you give an elderly relative who is starting to lose their thread. "Eleanor, dear, are you feeling all right? The car is oceanic. The sky is, well, it's sky-colored, isn't it?" She patted my hand over the fence. "Perhaps you've been in the sun too long." The conversation was over. She retreated into her house, casting a worried glance back at me. I hadn't just failed to communicate, I had marked myself as unstable. I was the crazy old woman next door who babbled nonsense words. The gray calm, as I'd started to call it in my journal, had claimed her completely. It wasn't an act, her reality simply didn't have the slot for my data to fit into. This led me to the subplot of my quiet obsession, a mystery that seemed, at first, entirely separate. His name was Julian Croft. I remembered him from years ago. A local artist, reclusive and intense, who had lived in a small cottage down towards Rottingdean. He had been utterly consumed by his work, which was almost exclusively seascapes. His paintings were not the gentle watercolors of hobbyists. They were huge, violent canvases, thick with impasto, capturing the churning, furious energy of the channel. And they had been, I remembered with a painful clarity, studies in a single color. He'd used every shade imaginable, ultramarine, cerulean, indigo, azure, cobalt. His work was a symphony of it. He had vanished about 5 years ago. Just packed up and left, people said. No one knew where. His cottage was sold, his paintings dispersed to a few local galleries and private collectors. Driven by a new, desperate hypothesis, I took the bus to the Brighton Museum and Art Gallery. I knew they had one of his pieces in their permanent modern art collection. I found it in a quiet upstairs room. The label read, Julian Croft, Channel Study Number 4, Oil on Canvas, c. 2015. The painting was a maelstrom of texture. You could feel the force of the waves, see the spray flying from the crests. But the color was gone. The entire, massive canvas was a churning vortex of gray, black, and white. It was powerful, yes, but it was dead. It was a memory of a storm, not the storm itself. I stared at it for a full hour, ignoring the curious looks from a pair of German tourists. My theory solidified in my mind. Croft hadn't just been painting the sea. He had been painting the color. He had been obsessed with it. And what happens to a man whose entire world is based on a concept that begins to dissolve? He wouldn't have accepted it. He would have fought it. My research began in earnest. I became a fixture at the local history archive, a place usually reserved for people tracing their family trees. I wasn't tracing a person, I was tracing a ghost. I requested old newspapers, art reviews, exhibition catalogs from a decade ago. The archivist, a young man with a studious beard and kind eyes, was helpful, if puzzled by my requests. Julian Croft. He was brilliant. A bit of a one-trick pony, maybe. All those monochromatic seascapes. Very dramatic. Monochromatic? I asked, my blood running cold. You mean, in shades of gray? Of course, he said, pulling out a catalog from a 2014 exhibition. That was his whole thing. The gray period, they called it. Exploring the soul of the coast without the distraction of color. He slid the catalog across the table. I opened it. Page after page of reproductions of Croft's paintings. Sea Fury. Cliffs at Dawn. Nocturne. All of them, in the glossy print, were magnificent, tempestuous studies in gray. But in the corner of my mind, a phantom memory screamed that this was wrong. I remembered a review of this very exhibition. The critic had praised Croft as the finest manipulator of the color blue since Yves Klein. The word wasn't in the review anymore. The article now praised his manipulation of tone. The contagion wasn't new. It had been working backwards, rewriting history, for at least 5 years, maybe more. Croft hadn't been a painter of gray. He had been a painter of the disappearing color. And the world had calmly and efficiently edited his memory, his legacy, to fit the new reality. I found his old address. The cottage had been renovated, a modern glass extension bolted onto its flint and brick side. I sat on a bench opposite, watching it for a long time. It told me nothing. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A footnote in an old interview with Croft. He was grumbling about the local council refusing his application for a studio space. They want me to paint seagulls for tourists, he'd scoffed. I need space. I found my own. A place with a proper door, facing the truth. A proper door, facing the truth. It was poetic, meaningless artist speak. But the word door snagged in my mind. I started walking. Not my usual gentle constitutional along the top path, but long, arduous treks along the windswept concrete of the Undercliff Walk, the chalk cliffs looming on one side, the vast gray sea on the other. This path was a strange, liminal space, dotted with the decaying concrete structures of a bygone era, old lidos, forgotten pumphouses, boarded-up shelters. I was looking for a door. A door that looked like it belonged to a reclusive, obsessive artist. A door that faced the sea. Days turned into a week. I was growing weary, my quest feeling more and more like a fool's errand. My notebook was filled with frantic scribbles, diagrams of altered paintings, timelines of the creeping erasure. I was sleeping poorly, haunted by dreams of a featureless gray world. Then I found it. Tucked away behind a crumbling sea wall, almost entirely hidden by overgrown buddleia, was a small, heavy-set iron door set into the concrete base of the cliff itself. It must have been an old service entrance for a defunct pumping station. It was rusted, salt-stained, and streaked with guano. And it was painted. Even with the color gone, the shade was distinctive. Darker than the sky, deeper than the sea. It was a flat, matte color, but I knew, with an instinct that defied the gray reality around me, what it had once been. This was shade 9. Deep sky. What I would have called indigo. There was no handle, but a small keyhole, clogged with rust. I knelt, my old knees protesting, and peered at the area around the frame. And there, scratched into the concrete with what must have been a nail or the sharp edge of a stone, was a single word. Azure. The word hit me like a physical blow. A synonym. A more poetic, more specific word for the one that had been erased. He had carved it here, a desperate anchor against the tide of forgetting. It was a word that hadn't been important enough for the contagion to scrub. A loophole. And next to the word was a small, crude drawing. A key. Underneath it, 2 words, my vase. I stumbled back to my feet, my mind racing, connecting the disparate points of my lonely investigation. Croft. The door. The key. My vase. My vase. It couldn't be. Arthur had bought it for me in Venice. Hadn't he? I hurried home, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The isolation was no longer just a feeling, it was a conspiracy I was tangled in. I burst into my living room and went straight to the mantelpiece. I picked up the gray vase. It felt heavier now, freighted with impossible meaning. I had never questioned its story. It was a romantic memory, a cornerstone of my life with Arthur. But now, filtered through the lens of my creeping madness, I forced myself to be objective. To be the history teacher I once was. Examine the provenance. I turned the vase over. On its base, so small I had never paid it any mind, was a maker's mark. Not the flowing signature of a Murano glassblower. It was a simple, stark monogram. J.C. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. Julian Croft. The vase was his. My treasured memory of Venice, of Arthur handing it to me on a sun-drenched balcony, was a fabrication. A lie. But was it my lie? Or a lie that had been given to me? My mind reeled, trying to grasp the implications. Had I known Croft? Had he given me the vase? The past was suddenly a fog. The contagion wasn't just erasing a concept, it was patching the holes with new, plausible memories. My romantic story about the vase was a cognitive sealant, poured into the crack left by the truth. The truth was likely far more mundane, I'd probably bought it at a local art fair and forgotten. The Venice story was just, better. And the world, or whatever was changing it, preferred the neater narrative. The revelation galvanized me. The mystery of the vase was no longer a personal affront, it was a clue. The key to Croft's door, the door he called Azure, was somehow connected to this gray ghost on my mantelpiece. I examined the vase again, not as a memento, but as a puzzle box. It was hollow, of course. I ran my fingers around the inside, feeling the smooth, cool glass. Nothing. I filled it with water and emptied it. Nothing. I held it up to the light, turning it over and over. The swirls of gray, which had seemed so random, now looked like a map, a topography of chaos. And there, near the bottom, I saw it. A slight thickening of the glass. A flaw. A small, self-contained bubble inside the base, no bigger than a pea. And within the bubble, something dark and metallic. There was no way to get it out without breaking the vase. The thought was sacrilege. It was still, despite its grayness, my most cherished object. To shatter it felt like a betrayal of Arthur, of Venice, of my own life story, however false it might be. But the alternative was to sit here in my quiet house and let the gray wash over me completely. To forget I ever knew a color named blue, to accept that the sky was sky shade and my memories were mutable. I took the vase to the kitchen. I wrapped it in a thick tea towel, laid it on the stone floor, and closed my eyes. I raised a small hammer. The first tap did nothing. The second created a sickening crack. On the third, the vase shattered with a sound like a breaking heart. I unwrapped the towel. Amidst the shards of gray glass lay a small, old-fashioned iron key. It was rusted, and a small tag was attached to it with a piece of wire. On the tag, one word was written in faint ink, Azure. The key felt cold and real in my palm. A key to a door to a place a man had hidden in to face the truth. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had to go there. The world seemed to be accelerating its decay. The change was no longer confined to language and objects. The sky itself had changed. It was no longer a dynamic canvas, shifting from pale morning light to the deeper shades of twilight. It was now a uniform, matte gray, like a freshly painted ceiling. There were no gradations, no subtle shifts. The sun was a white disk in a gray field, the moon, the same. The sea, mirroring it, was a restless sheet of liquid metal. The gray calm was becoming the gray monotony. People were changing, too. It was subtle, but I saw it. A placidness was settling over Saltine. There was less laughter in the streets. Fewer arguments. Conversations in the local cafe were muted, practical exchanges. People still went about their lives, working, shopping, walking their dogs, but their emotional range seemed to be narrowing, compressing into a calm, functional middle ground. Their eyes, even the ones that had once been brown or green, seemed to be losing their vibrancy, becoming duller, flatter. They were all looking more and more like the gray vase. My alliance, if you could call it that, came and went like a phantom. One afternoon, in the library, I was looking at old photographs of the coastline. The archivist, the bearded young man named Tom, came over. Looking for Mr. Croft again, Mrs. Vance, he asked, his voice low. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He leaned closer. I remember, he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. My grandfather was a sailor. He had a tattoo. An anchor. It was the other color. The one we're not supposed to talk about. My head snapped up. I stared at him, my heart seizing. Hope, fierce and blinding, surged through me. You remember it? He bit his lip, his eyes darting around the empty archive room. I think so. It's like a dream. But then I look at the sea now, and I think I must have imagined it. It's always been like this, hasn't it? No, I said, grabbing his arm. It hasn't. It was called blue. Say it. Tom looked terrified. He shook his head, pulling his arm away. I can't. It doesn't feel right. It feels dangerous. He looked down at the photograph I was holding, a black and white image of the Undercliff Walk from the 1970s. Look, forget I said anything. It's better not to think about it. It's calmer this way. He walked away, busying himself with a stack of books, refusing to meet my eye. He had been on the edge. He had felt the phantom limb, but the gray calm had pulled him back. The contagion wasn't just erasing memory, it was offering peace in its place. The peace of oblivion. The encounter left me more isolated than ever. I hadn't found an ally, I had watched a man choose to forget. That night, I took the key and a powerful torch and walked to the azure door. The wind howled along the concrete path, a mournful, colorless sound. The gray sea crashed against the gray wall. The world was a charcoal sketch of its former self. The key was stiff in the lock. I had to use both hands, putting all my weight into it, until it finally turned with a painful grating sound. The heavy iron door swung inwards on protesting hinges, opening into a darkness that felt absolute. I switched on my torch. The beam cut through the black, illuminating a narrow, brick-lined tunnel, sloping gently downwards into the cliff. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth, ozone, and something else. Something like static electricity, the scent of a vast, unseen machine. I stepped inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. The sound of the sea vanished, replaced by a profound, humming silence. This was it. Julian Croft's sanctuary. His laboratory. His tomb. I walked down the tunnel, my torch beam bouncing off the damp brickwork. I was no longer just an observer of the contagion. I was actively seeking its source. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The tunnel opened into a surprisingly large, circular chamber, hewn from the chalk itself. It was an old reservoir or cistern, perhaps 100 feet across. In the center of the room was Julian Croft's last stand. An easel stood, holding a huge, blank canvas. All around it, the floor was a disaster zone of artistic creation and destruction. Dozens of other canvases were stacked against the curved walls. I ran my torch over them. They were all the same, frantic, textured whirls of gray, white, and black. Some had been slashed with a knife. Others had been scrubbed, the paint smeared away in a frenzy, as if he'd been trying to reveal something underneath. Tubes of paint were everywhere, squeezed dry, their labels stark: Shade 7, Shade 8, Shade 9, Primary Sky, Deep Sky. He had bought every variant of the phantom color he could find, trying to force it back into existence through sheer will. On a makeshift table lay his journals. I opened the top one. The early pages were filled with sketches of the sea, notes on light and pigment, and joyful, scrawling text. The word blue was everywhere. Then, the entries grew more erratic. October 12th, something is wrong with the cobalt. It looks thin. Drained. November 3rd, people are calling the sky, sky shade. Like idiots. It's cerulean. I will paint it until they remember. December 21st, the words are fading. I tried to say ultramarine to the girl in the art shop and she just stared at me. It felt like pulling a tooth from my own brain. I have to write them down. Blue, azure, indigo, cobalt, cyan, sapphire. The list went on for pages, a desperate litany against forgetting. The final entries were terrifying. March 9th, it's not a forgetting. It's a replacement. A quiet, gray tide is washing in from somewhere else. It's calmer. Simpler. It wants everything to be the same. I can feel it when I close my eyes. A great, peaceful emptiness. April 2nd, I brought the vase here. My best attempt at trapping the color. A memory in glass. But it's fading. The gray is seeping in, even here. The door is the only thing that holds. Azure. I painted it myself. A statement of fact against the gray lie. April 15th, the tide is coming in for good. It's not hostile. It's just, inevitable. It doesn't want to destroy us. It just wants us to be quiet. To be calm. To be gray. I tried to paint the door, to capture the last of it. But you can't paint a memory. I am going to open it. The last page was blank. My eyes were drawn to the far side of the chamber. There, set into the chalk, was another door. Not the iron one I had come through, but a simple wooden door, painted with the same deep, dark shade as the one on the cliff face. It had no handle, no hinges, no lock that I could see. It was just a rectangle of impossible color in the torchlight. This was Julian Croft's azure door. His final painting wasn't on the easel, it was the door. I knew this was the source. The focal point. Not a machine, not a toxin, but a place. A wound. I approached it, my torch beam trembling. The air around it hummed with that static charge, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. The color of the door was so intense, so absolute, it felt like it was vibrating. It was the color of my vase, of the cornflowers, of the sky, of my deepest memories, all distilled into one perfect, painful rectangle. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a door in the wall. It was a door that was the wall. It seemed to have no thickness, yet it was completely opaque. It was a patch, a portal, a tear. My hand reached out, against my better judgment. My fingertips, wrinkled with age, touched the surface. And the universe fell away. There was no sound, no light, no sensation. There was only presence. A vast, silent, and utterly placid consciousness. It was the gray calm, but not as a symptom, as the source. I felt an intelligence of immense, unimaginable age and scale. It wasn't evil. It had no concept of malice or intent as we would understand them. It was an existence of pure entropy, of ultimate quietude. And our world, with its vibrant chaos, its clashing colors, its loud, messy emotions, was an irritation. A noise. The color blue, for some reason of cosmic frequency I could never comprehend, was the loudest note in our symphony. It was a vibration that grated on the silence. So the presence was simply turning it down. Gently, patiently erasing the dissonant frequency. Leaching the color, the word, the memory. And offering in its place a gift. The gift of its own nature, a calm, gray peace. The end of struggle. The end of passion. The end of individuality. I felt it inviting me in. I could let go. I could shed the painful memory of Arthur, the anxiety of my lonely existence, the terror of this discovery. I could become part of the quiet. Part of the gray. It would be so easy. So peaceful. I saw Tom the archivist, choosing to forget. I saw Carol, smiling her placid smile. They were already sinking into the calm. But I also saw the flash of a kingfisher's wing. I saw Arthur's eyes, which I now remembered had been a shade of shade 8. I felt the hot sting of grief and the fierce joy of love. They were noisy, chaotic, painful things. But they were mine. With a gasp that tore through my lungs, I snatched my hand back. I scrambled away from the door, falling to the dusty floor, my heart hammering. The connection was broken. I was back in the chalk chamber, the hum of the door a terrifying backdrop to my ragged breathing. I knew I couldn't destroy it. How do you fight a color? How do you wage war on a state of being? All I could do was run. I fled, leaving Croft's journals, his desperate art, his final mystery behind. I burst out of the iron service door into the night, gasping the cold, salty air. The sky was a flat, featureless gray. The sea was a churning expanse of gray. The world I had returned to was diminished, but it was still my world. I didn't go back. I told no one. Who would believe me? And what would be the point? To be dismissed as a madwoman, or worse, to draw the attention of the silence I had touched. My life has a new routine now. I still have my tea. I still read my books, their pages subtly rewritten. I still walk along the cliffs. But I am changed. I am no longer a curator of quietude, I am a guardian of a secret, a lone archivist of a lost color. Sometimes, I see the gray calm in people's eyes, a placid acceptance that chills me more than any rage. The world is getting quieter. Softer. Grayer. The contagion is not just quiet, it is patient. Yesterday, I was in my garden. I looked at my roses, their vibrant scarlet petals a defiant shout against the encroaching muteness. I found myself thinking, for the first time, that they were perhaps a little too loud. A little too garish. A softer shade of pink, or even a nice, calm gray, would be so much more restful. I caught the thought and crushed it, my heart cold with terror. I still have the shards of the vase. I keep them in a small wooden box. Sometimes, I take them out and look at them. Just pieces of gray glass. But I remember. I force myself to remember. The sea is outside my window now. It is vast and deep and restless. It is the color of the end of things. And I am the only one who knows what we have lost. I am the only one who remembers blue. And I wonder, every single day, how much longer I have before I, too, sink into the calm. Frequency 119. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life is built on sound. Not music, not the grand, structured architecture of a symphony, but the interstitial noises. The hum of a transformer box behind a bakery at 4 a.m. The specific rustle of a cottonwood leaf versus an oak. The way a person's sigh changes character in a tiled room compared to a carpeted one. I am a Lara Vance, and I am a sound designer. For my small, acoustically treated apartment in a city that sprawls and glitters like Minneapolis, I capture, clean, and catalog the audio of the world. My ears are my livelihood, my obsession, my only truly reliable sense. It began on a Tuesday. I was editing a dawn chorus I'd recorded in Loring Park. A simple project for a wellness app, 30 minutes of authentic, urban birdsong. I had my Sennheisers on, the cans cupping my ears like a second skull, isolating me from the world. I was trimming the low-end rumble of a distant street sweeper when I heard it. A hum. It was faint, almost subliminal, a low-frequency drone that sat behind the birdsong, like a watermark on a photograph. I checked my gear. The interface, the microphone preamp, the cables. All clean. I ran the audio through my spectrum analyzer, a beautiful piece of software that visualizes sound as a landscape of peaks and valleys. Nothing. The waveform was pure. The analyzer showed only the spiky chatter of the robins and sparrows, the gentle sigh of the wind. But I could hear it. A perfect G-sharp, humming with the steady, unwavering insistence of a tuning fork. I took off the headphones and the silence of my studio rushed in. For a moment, it was gone. Then, like an afterimage on the retina, it returned. Fainter, but there. A vibration in the bones of my jaw. Tinnitus, I thought. The sound engineer's boogeyman. The phantom noise born of silence and damaged nerves. It was the most logical explanation, and the one that terrified me most. To lose the fidelity of my hearing would be to lose my craft, to lose myself. I called my brother, Ben. He's a carpenter, a man who trusts the grain of wood and the heft of a hammer. He's my only real family, and my tether to the practical world. You're probably just stressed, Elle, he said over the phone, his voice a comforting baritone against the faint, secret hum in my ear. You've been working on that video game project for weeks. Staring at waveforms all day. Give your ears a rest. It's not in my head, Ben. It's in the recording. So send it to me. I emailed him the pristine wave file. He called back 10 minutes later. It's birds, Elle. Just birds. Sounds nice. Peaceful. You don't hear a low hum. A steady note. A pause. I imagined him rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture of deep, fraternal concern. No. Nothing. Maybe you should get your ears checked. Seriously. I didn't. Instead, I tried to disprove it. I recorded the silence of my studio. The analyzer showed a near flat line, the digital equivalent of absolute zero. But through my headphones, I heard the G-sharp. I recorded the hiss of the radiator, the clatter of me making coffee, the rumble of the 17 bus passing on the street below. The hum was in all of it. A constant, parasitic sound that only I could perceive. I tried to rationalize it. The building's wiring. The city's power grid. Some new cell tower broadcasting at a weird harmonic. There were a million explanations, each one a flimsy shield against the more frightening possibility, that the error wasn't in the world, but in me. For a week, I lived with it. A quiet companion to my thoughts. It was unsettling, but manageable. I learned to mix around it, to mentally subtract it from the sounds I was working on. My life continued its rhythm. I'd take my daily walks, my portable recorder and shotgun mic in my bag, hunting for sonic textures. The squeal of a particular gate in Whittier, the chatter of Somali women outside the Carmel Mall, the percussive thump of basketballs in a caged court. It was on one of these walks that I first noticed the listening. I was in a coffee shop downtown, a cavernous place with high ceilings that made every sound echo. I was trying to capture the specific clink of their heavy ceramic mugs. The barista, a young woman with pink hair and a sleeve of tattoos, was taking the order of the man in front of me. "I'll have a large dark roast," and the man, middle-aged, suited, stopped mid-sentence. His head tilted, just a fraction. His eyes unfocused, looking past the barista at something 1,000 yards away. The barista waited. Then her own head tilted. The same angle, the same distant gaze. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. An eternity in the flow of a transaction. Then they both blinked. "And a blueberry scone," the man finished, as if nothing had happened. The barista nodded, her focus returned. "Coming right up." I lowered my recorder. The hum in my ears seemed to pulse in time with the moment of shared stillness. A coincidence. People get distracted. They lose their train of thought. That's all it was. But then it happened again. On the bus ride home, 2 teenagers were having a loud, animated argument about a TV show. Suddenly, the girl stopped talking. Her head cocked towards the window, her expression slackening. Her friend, about to deliver a rebuttal, mirrored the posture. They stared, unseeing, at the passing blur of brick buildings. Then, just as abruptly, they snapped back to themselves and resumed their argument at the same volume, the same intensity. No acknowledgement of the pause. I felt a cold prickle on my arms. I was looking for it now, and so I was seeing it everywhere. A woman pushing a stroller who would stop, listen, and then continue. A construction worker, high on a scaffold, who would freeze with his drill halfway to the wall, his helmeted head angled towards the sky. They were small moments, glitches in the social fabric, easily missed, easily dismissed. But they all shared that same signature gesture. The slight, inquisitive tilt of the head. As if they were all trying to catch a whisper on the edge of hearing. The same whisper that was now a permanent resident in my own skull. Ben came over for dinner that Friday. I made pasta. He brought wine. I tried to act normal, to push the hum to the background. "So, how are the ears?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Fine," I lied. "You were right. Just stress." He looked relieved. He wanted me to be okay, and I wanted that for him. We talked about his latest project, a set of custom cabinets for a house out by Lake of the Isles. He spoke with his hands, describing the challenges of the wood, the precision of the joints. In the middle of a sentence about dovetails, he stopped. His fork hovered over his plate. His head tilted. My breath caught in my throat. It was the same gesture. The vacant look. He was listening. "Ben." I whispered. The hum in my ears surged, a crescendo of G-sharp that made my teeth ache. He blinked, shaking his head slightly. He looked down at his fork as if surprised to see it there. "Sorry. Where was I?" "Dovetails," I said, my voice thin. "Right, dovetails." He continued his story, but the warmth was gone from the room. He hadn't noticed. He had no idea he'd just disconnected from his own conversation, from me. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, gripping the sink until my knuckles were white. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were wide, my face pale. I could still hear the hum, a steady, malevolent presence. It wasn't tinnitus. It wasn't the wiring. It was real. And it was spreading. The world was full of people who were starting to listen, and I was the only one who could hear the song. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The next few weeks were a descent. The hum was no longer a simple G-sharp. It had acquired a texture, a pulse. It modulated, shifting in pitch by microtones, creating a slow, rhythmic beating. At night, when the city fell into a deeper quiet, it was at its worst. Lying in bed, I could hear what sounded like proto-syllables carried on the frequency, meaningless phonetic fragments that felt like a language struggling to be born. Vom, zil, feth. They were nonsense, but they were structured nonsense. The feeling was profoundly intimate and violating, like someone whispering gibberish directly into my brainstem. Sleep became a battlefield. I would wake up with the ghost syllables echoing in my head, the hum a physical pressure behind my eyes. My work suffered. How could I clean a track when the noise I was trying to eliminate was woven into my own perception? I started a journal. Not a diary of feelings, but a logbook of data. I used a decibel meter app and a frequency analyzer on my phone, knowing they couldn't detect the hum, but hoping to find correlations. I logged the time, my location, the perceived loudness on a scale of 1 to 10, and any observed, listening, incidents. A pattern emerged quickly. The hum was loudest at night and during the early morning hours. It seemed to amplify near large metallic structures, bridges, radio towers, skyscrapers. And the listening incidents were becoming more frequent, more pronounced. I saw a group of office workers on their lunch break in PV Plaza. All 5 of them, sitting on the concrete steps, fell silent at the exact same moment. 5 heads tilted in unison towards the idea center, holding the pose for a full 10 seconds before resuming their chatter about spreadsheets and weekend plans, oblivious to their shared choreography. The isolation was the worst part. It was a cold, clear glass wall between me and the rest of humanity. I was on one side, hearing this constant, invasive signal. They were on the other, placidly unaware, slowly being tuned by it. I tried to talk to Ben again. I showed him my journal, the neat columns of data, the detailed observations. I played him a recording. This time using a contact microphone pressed against the steel frame of my window. "Listen, right here," I said, pointing at the 3-minute mark on the editing software. "You can't hear it, but this is when I saw 3 people on the street below all stop and look up. At the same time." The hum was a 9 out of 10. He scrolled through my log, his brow furrowed with a mixture of pity and exasperation. "Ilara, this is obsessive. This is not healthy. You're not sleeping. You're fixating on coincidences. People space out. It's normal." "It's not normal, Ben. It's a pattern. They're all doing the same thing. They're listening to something." "To what?" he demanded, his voice rising. "To the magic hum that only you can hear. The one that no microphone in the world can pick up. Does that sound sane to you?" His words hit me harder than a physical blow. Sane. The question I had been desperately trying to avoid. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was all a complex, auditory hallucination brought on by stress and loneliness. A folie à un, a madness of one. The chasm between us widened into a canyon. Our calls became shorter, strained. I stopped trying to explain. He stopped asking if I was okay. My world shrank to my apartment and my increasingly frantic research. I dove into the deepest corners of the internet. Audiophile forums, electrical engineering message boards, conspiracy theory subreddits. I searched for unexplained hum, auditory pareidolia, citywide low-frequency noise. I found thousands of posts. The Bristol hum. The Taos hum. People all over the world reported similar phenomena. But their descriptions were different: a diesel engine idling, a background thrum. They were annoyances. What I was hearing felt like a signal. It felt intentional. Most of these online discussions devolved into arguments about 5G towers, secret military experiments, or HARP. It was a wilderness of paranoia, and I found no solid ground. Then, buried deep in a thread on a defunct audio engineering forum from the early 2000s, I found a post by a user named GoldenEars68. Anyone in the Twin Cities ever heard of WCMNX? Old urban legend. Experimental station from the 60s. Broadcast on an unlicensed frequency. My prof at the U mentioned it once. Said they were doing psychological acoustics before the FCC shut them down hard. Story was they were trying to broadcast a frequency that could make you feel things. Calm, fear, whatever. Gave me the creeps. WCMNX. The name felt like a key. I started a new line of investigation, searching newspaper archives and university records. Information was scarce, almost non-existent. It was as if it had been scrubbed. All I could find were a handful of scanned clippings from the Minneapolis Tribune, dated 1967. They mentioned a fringe broadcaster being investigated for unauthorized transmissions. One article quoted an anonymous FCC official calling the station's activities technically sophisticated and deeply irresponsible. Then, nothing. The trail went cold. It was a dead end, but it planted a seed. A source. A human origin. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just a random hum. Someone, at some point, had created a signal. And maybe it had never truly gone away. The secondary mystery, this ghost of a radio station, became my obsession. It felt more tangible than the hum itself. It was something I could investigate. While the city outside my window was quietly losing its mind, I was hunting for a ghost from 1967. The strangeness escalated. The listening was no longer passive. I saw a man at a bus stop meticulously arranging fallen leaves into a perfect spiral. He wasn't admiring his work, he was just doing it, his head tilted in that familiar way. When the bus arrived, he simply stood up and got on, leaving the pattern behind. One evening, from my window, I watched a woman walking her dog. She stopped, unclipped the leash, and stood perfectly still. The dog, a golden retriever, sat patiently. The woman then began to walk in a slow, deliberate square on the sidewalk. 4 steps forward, turn 90 degrees right. 4 steps, turn. She completed the square 3 times. Then she clipped the leash back on the dog and continued her walk as if she'd only paused to check her phone. The hum in my ears felt different during these moments. Sharper. More focused. The ghost syllables became clearer. Align. Order. Repeat. It was a language of instruction. And people were starting to follow it. The isolation became absolute. I was a ghost in my own city, watching the living respond to a voice I could only hear. I'd walk through the skyways and see them, the listeners. Their synchronized pauses. Their small, pointless, coordinated behaviors. They were nodes in a network, receiving a signal that was slowly rewriting their operating system. And I was the lone system administrator, locked out, watching the code change with no way to stop it. The question of my sanity was no longer the primary concern. The real question was far more terrifying: what was the purpose of the new program? Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The ghost of WCMNX wouldn't let me go. It was the only thread I had. After weeks of digging through digital archives, I found a name, Dr. Alastair Finch, a former professor of psychoacoustics at the University of Minnesota, retired for over 2 decades. His name was mentioned in a footnote of a footnote in an academic paper on nonlinear wave propagation from 1971. The author thanked him for his pioneering, if controversial, early insights. Finding him was difficult. He had no online presence. I finally tracked down a landline number through old university directories. When I called, a frail, wary voice answered. Dr. Finch? My name is Alara Vance. I'm an independent researcher, and I'm looking into a radio broadcaster from the 1960s called WCMNX. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and immediate. I could hear the faint, crackling hum of the telephone line, and beneath it, my own constant G-sharp companion. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice tight. "Dr. Finch, please," I pressed, desperation making my voice thin. "I believe it was broadcasting on a unique frequency. Around 119 megahertz. A signal designed to influence perception." Another, longer silence. "Who gave you that number?" he finally whispered. "I put it together from fragments. Please, I just need to understand. I think the signal is back." He agreed to meet me, reluctantly. His address was in a quiet, leafy neighborhood of St. Paul, in a small bungalow overflowing with books. He was a bird of a man, thin and stooped, with pale blue eyes that still held a spark of fierce intelligence. We sat in his dusty living room, the air thick with the smell of old paper. "WCMNX wasn't a radio station," he began, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them on his knee. "It was us. A small, unsanctioned research group at the university. We called it the Metropolitan Consciousness Navigation Project. WCMN. The X was for experimental. It was all very grand and foolish." He explained their theory. Based on fringe ideas of bioresonance and cymatics, they believed that the human brain, and indeed consciousness itself, operated on a specific resonant frequency. They thought that if they could broadcast a pure, sympathetic signal, they could soothe anxiety, enhance focus, even encourage pro-social behavior on a mass scale. They wanted to harmonize the city. "Our signal was 119.2 megahertz, he said, looking at me intently. "We chose it because it was an empty space on the dial, but more than that, it had a certain mathematical elegance in relation to brainwave patterns. We built a low-power transmitter and broadcast from the top of the Fauché Tower, just for a few hours at a time, late at night." "Did it work?" I asked, leaning forward. He let out a dry, rattling sigh. "Oh, it worked. Just not how we intended. We had observers around the city. They reported strange things. People becoming disoriented. Displaying repetitive, non-goal-oriented behaviors. The most disturbing thing was the memory loss. Subjects in the lab couldn't recall specific words. Simple, common nouns. They'd just pause, confused. The words were gone. We weren't harmonizing consciousness, we were fragmenting it. We were creating a contagion of cognitive decay." The FCC, tipped off by ham radio operators who detected the strange signal, shut them down with terrifying speed. Their research was confiscated, their lab dismantled, their careers threatened. The project was buried. "But a signal like that, it doesn't just vanish," Finch said, his gaze distant. "It propagates. It echoes. The modern world is a perfect resonator. All those cell towers, Wi-Fi routers, the power grid itself, it's an amplifier. The ghost of our signal could be caught in a feedback loop, bouncing around the city's infrastructure, growing stronger." I left Finch's house with a sense of cold, terrifying validation. It was real. Frequency 119. A failed experiment from 50 years ago, now a plague of silence and strange loops. The city continued its quiet transformation. The synchronized behaviors became more complex. I saw a line of people waiting for a bus, not talking, not on their phones, but collectively tracing the outline of the bus shelter's shadow with their feet. The effect was a slow, unsettling ballet. The linguistic decay that Finch had described began to manifest. It was subtle at first. People would stumble over words. I heard a news anchor on TV pause for a full 2 seconds, her face a mask of blank confusion, before finally saying, "the structure," instead of, "the bridge." Then certain words started to vanish entirely. The word, "key," was one of the first I noticed. I watched a man patting his pockets, a look of mild panic on his face. His wife asked, "What's wrong?" He replied, I can't find the thing. For the door. He held up his hand, making a turning motion. He hadn't forgotten the object, he had lost the word for it. His wife nodded, understanding perfectly. Oh, right. Did you check the bowl on the counter? I tried to use the word in a conversation with a clerk at a hardware store. I'm looking for a copy of a key, I said. He stared at me. Not with hostility, but with a profound, placid lack of comprehension, as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. A copy of a... He trailed off, his head tilting. The hum in my ears screamed. The metal thing, I said, forcing myself to adapt, my heart pounding. To open a lock. Ah. His face cleared. The turner. Aisle 4. The world was editing itself. Words, concepts, were being deemed inefficient and pruned from the collective vocabulary. The city wasn't falling into chaos. It was being streamlined into a new, quieter, more gestural reality. My hope for finding an ally, another hearer, had become a desperate need. I found one on a fringe acoustics forum. A user named Subbase12 in a suburb just north of the city described a persistent, modulating hum and people acting like NPCs in a game. We exchanged frantic, encrypted emails. The relief was intoxicating. I wasn't alone. We agreed to meet at a neutral, open space, a park midway between our homes. I saw him from a distance. A man in his late 20s, nervously scanning the crowd. He looked normal. As I got closer, he spotted me and a wave of relief washed over his face. Ilara, he said. His name was Mark. Mark. You hear it too? I asked, the words tumbling out. Constantly. A G-sharp, right? But it pulses now. And at night, do you hear the whispers? We talked for an hour. He described seeing the same loops, the same synchronized stillness. For the first time in months, the glass wall of my isolation shattered. I wasn't crazy. Then, as he was describing seeing his neighbors all sweep their porches at the exact same time one morning, he stopped. His head tilted. His eyes went distant. And he began to hum. It wasn't a conscious act. It was a low, resonant drone that came from deep in his chest. It was the frequency. The perfect, pure G-sharp. Being near him, this other hearer, didn't dilute the signal, it focused it. The hum in my own head exploded into a physical, nauseating force. The park around me swam, the colors bleeding at the edges. The ghost syllables were no longer whispers, they were shouts. Join. Resonate. Transmit. I understood. We weren't the survivors. We weren't the immune. We were the next phase. The hearers were becoming human transmitters, amplifiers for the signal. Mark wasn't an ally, he was a carrier. I stumbled backwards. My hands over my ears. Mark. He didn't respond. He just sat there on the park bench, humming contentedly to himself, a blissful, vacant smile on his face. I turned and ran. I ran until the park was a green blur behind me, until my lungs burned and the sound of my own ragged breath could momentarily drown out the signal. But the hum was still there, waiting. And I was more alone than ever before, not just a witness to the contagion, but a potential instrument of its propagation. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The run from the park broke something in me. The encounter with Mark, the would-be ally turned human transmitter, stripped away my last layer of hope. I was no longer just an observer. The signal was actively trying to recruit me. The hum had become a constant, grinding pressure inside my skull. The whispers were no longer nonsense syllables, they were simple, seductive commands, looping over and over. Listen. Quiet. Match the tone. Align. Let go. It was a siren song for the conscious mind, promising peace in exchange for submission. I found myself pausing for long stretches, my head tilted, my hand hovering over a light switch. I would catch my own reflection and see the same vacant look I'd seen in 1,000 strangers. The fight was becoming exhausting. Part of me, a tired, frayed part, wanted to give in. To stop fighting the current and just hum. That terrified me more than anything. The confrontation wasn't with a person or a machine. It was with the signal itself, and it had to happen in the only place I had any power, my studio. My sanctuary of sound was now my last line of defense. My desperate plan was to fight fire with fire, or rather, sound with sound. If frequency 119 was a coherent, orderly signal, I would counter it with its opposite, a personalized, chaotic wall of noise designed to scramble the signal before it could fully take root in my brain. I locked the door, unplugged my phone, and sealed the window frames with acoustic foam. For 2 days, I worked, fueled by caffeine and fear. I surrounded myself with my equipment, synthesizers, oscillators, signal generators, my computer. I wasn't just mixing sounds, I was weaving a sonic shield. I started with a base of pure white noise, the sound of every frequency at once. Then I layered in recordings of chaos, crashing waves, a roaring bonfire, the cacophony of 1,000 seagulls. I used my synthesizers to generate atonal, arrhythmic pulses that deliberately clashed with the G-sharp of the hum. I created sweeps of rising and falling frequencies designed to disrupt any attempt at resonance. It was the antithesis of my life's work. Instead of creating clean, elegant sound, I was building a monument to noise, a jagged, ugly, beautiful mess. I routed it all into my best pair of noise-canceling headphones and put them on. The effect was immediate and brutal. A storm of sound enveloped me, a physical assault on my eardrums. But underneath it, the steady, insistent hum of frequency 119 wavered. It was still there, but it was muffled, its authority diminished by the sheer force of my counter-signal. It was a painful, precarious victory. As I sat there, cocooned in my self-made hurricane, tweaking the oscillators, a new thought pierced through the noise. A horrifying epiphany. Dr. Finch's story, WCMNX, it was the origin, yes, but I had misunderstood the result. I'd thought of the signal as a broken record, an echo stuck on a loop. I was wrong. A signal that can make people forget a word isn't just decaying consciousness, it's editing it. A signal that can make a dozen strangers perform a synchronized, pointless task isn't just a glitch, it's a test. A drill. Frequency 119 wasn't an echo. It was learning. It was using the millions of human minds in the city as a distributed neural network. Each listening pause, each behavioral loop, each forgotten word was a processing cycle. It was bootstrapping itself into a new form of consciousness, using our brains as its hardware. The lost words weren't forgotten, they were being deprecated, deemed inefficient for the new, silent, gestural language it was designing. The city wasn't breaking down. It was being optimized. This wasn't a contagion. It was an upgrade. The horror of that realization was absolute. We weren't the victims of a defunct experiment, we were the vessel for a new and alien birth. The story ends not with a bang, but with the hum. I am in my studio. I live here now. I have not been outside in weeks. The custom-built headphones are a permanent part of me, a clunky, wired crown. The chaotic symphony I created blasts into my ears 24 hours a day. It is a constant, grinding pain, a self-inflicted torture that is the only thing keeping me sane. Or, the only thing keeping me me. From my window on the 12th floor, I look down at the city. It has changed. There is a strange new grace to the way people move. The traffic flows with an impossible, fluid efficiency. There are no blaring horns, no raised voices. The ambient noise of the city, the sound I built my life on, has fallen away. It is quiet. Orderly. Synchronized. It is terrifyingly beautiful. I watch my brother, Ben. He is walking on the sidewalk across the street. He is not the same man who worried about my stress levels. His movements are economical, precise. He stops. He doesn't look at his phone. He doesn't seem to be waiting for anyone. He just stops. Then, he tilts his head. In the same instant, a dozen other people on the street do the same. The woman with the grocery bags, the young couple holding hands, the man walking his square completing dog. A silent, coordinated congregation. They all turn, in perfect, fluid unison, and look up. Directly at my window. Their expressions are not angry, not menacing. There is no emotion on their faces at all. Just a profound, unsettling patience. They are waiting. Waiting for the day my equipment fails, my will breaks, or my eardrums finally give out. Waiting for me to turn off the noise and join the song. The storm in my headphones rages on, my last defense against the serene, silent world. But even through the crashing waves and atonal shrieks, I can feel it. A faint, persistent vibration in the bones of my skull. The G-sharp. The ghost of frequency 119, bleeding through, a patient predator waiting for me to falter. Have I saved myself? Or have I merely bought a little time, a prisoner in my own fortress of sound, while the rest of the world evolves without me, into something new, something quiet, something utterly inhuman? The hum waits for an answer. And it has all the time in the world. The quiet contagion, the clock men. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The Chua line is a river, and I am one of millions of identical gray stones tumbled smooth by its current. Every morning at 7:48 a.m., I step into the third car of the train at Musashi Sakai Station. I stand to the left of the central doors, gripping the overhead hand strap with my right hand, my leather briefcase held in my left. The journey to Shinjuku takes 26 minutes. It is a ritual, a prayer to the god of punctuality, and for years, its sameness has been my comfort. My name is Kenji Tanaka. I am 34 years old. I work in the marketing department of a large electronics firm, where my value is measured in my ability to predict consumer behavior, to distill the chaos of human desire into neat graphs and actionable insights. I live alone in a 2 LDK apartment that is as orderly as my schedule. My life is a carefully constructed bulwark against the unexpected. The first crack in that bulwark appeared on a Tuesday in early May. The air was thick with the promise of summer humidity. I was standing in my usual spot on the train, reviewing a PowerPoint presentation on my phone, when a flicker of motion caught my eye. It was a man, perhaps in his late 50s, with a kind, tired face and a briefcase worn soft with age. He was standing near the doors, just as he always was. He glanced at the digital ad screen above the window, then his gaze dropped to his left wrist. He wore an old, elegant-looking timepiece with a leather strap. With his right thumb and forefinger, he made a tiny, pinching motion on the watch's crown, as if giving it a microscopic wind. Then his hand dropped. A moment later, he looked up at the ad screen again. A nervous tick, I thought. The city is full of them. The pressures of life in Tokyo manifest in a million little tremors of the soul. I returned to my presentation. But a few seconds later, he did it again. Ad screen. Wrist. Pinch. Drop. An odd little rhythm. I found myself watching, my thumb hovering over the phone screen. Ad screen. Wrist. Pinch. Drop. I began to count the seconds in my head, a habit from timing ad spots. 1,000, 2 1,000. It was 17 seconds. Almost precisely. I watched him for 5 more cycles. Each one was 17 seconds. The next morning, he was there again. I timed him. 17 seconds. It was uncanny. A compulsion so precisely metered it was like a piece of machinery. I felt a strange mixture of pity and revulsion. The man was a prisoner to his own private, invisible clock. Having noticed one crack, I began to see them everywhere. A high school girl in her dark blue uniform, who always sat in the corner seat, would stare out the window, her mouth forming silent words. I leaned closer one day, pretending to tie my shoe. She wasn't just moving her lips, she was mouthing the jingle for a popular brand of green tea. Oishi, sokai, anata no oka. Delicious, refreshing, your tea. But it was just that one line. A 4-bar loop, her eyes glassy and unfocused, replaying the snippet over and over for the entire journey. There was a woman in a prim pink cardigan who always stood near me. She would hold her purse in her left arm and, with her right hand, tap her Suica transit card against the leather. Tap tap tap. A 2-second pause. Tap tap tap. The sound was barely audible above the train's rumble, but once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. It was the sound of a leaky faucet in an otherwise silent house, an insistence that drilled into my brain. At first, I catalogued them as curiosities, the human debris that clutters the urban landscape. It was even a source of secret pride. My eye for detail, the one that made me good at my job, allowed me to see these hidden patterns others missed. I was the observer, the analyst, floating above the fray. The feeling didn't last. The sheer, unvarying repetition began to feel less like a human quirk and more like a software bug. I'd try to distract myself, burying my face in a book or scrolling through news articles, but my awareness of them was a physical presence. The silent chant of the jingle girl. The phantom tapping of the pink cardigan. The 17-second pilgrimage of the watchman's fingers. They were the background radiation of my commute, and its hum was growing louder. One Friday, after a particularly grueling week finalizing the quarterly projections, I mentioned it to Kaito, a junior colleague, as we walked to lunch. "It's the strangest thing," I said, trying to sound casual, like I was sharing a funny anecdote. "There's this man on my train every morning. He adjusts his watch every 17 seconds. On the dot. I timed him." Kaito laughed, a loud, easy sound. "Seriously? A watchwinder? Sounds like my uncle. He has to check if the gas is off 3 times before he leaves the house. Everyone's got their thing, man. You probably do something weird too and don't even know it." His words were meant to be reassuring, to fold my observation into the realm of the normal and harmless. But they did the opposite. "You probably do something weird too." The thought was a splinter under a nail. I, Kenji Tanaka, a man whose entire existence was a monument to deliberate action and control. The idea was absurd. Yet, it lingered. That evening, I went home and stood in front of the mirror in my entryway. I watched myself. I saw a man in a slightly rumpled suit, his face etched with fatigue. I stood there for a full 5 minutes, waiting for an unconscious tick, or repetitive gesture to reveal itself. Nothing. I took off my shoes. I straightened the mat. I hung up my jacket. All were conscious, singular actions. I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy. Kaito was wrong. I was not like them. But the relief was temporary. The next week, the anomalies intensified, or perhaps my perception of them did. The barista at the Starbucks near my office, a young woman with dyed red hair, wiped the counter with a white cloth. I watched her as I waited for my cafe latte. She made a broad, clockwise circle, then 2 smaller, quick circles inside it, then a straight swipe from left to right. A moment later, she did it again, on a perfectly clean stretch of stainless steel. Circle. 2 small circles. Swipe. The exact same choreography. I started to feel a creeping sense of dread. The world, my meticulously ordered world, was starting to feel frayed at the edges. These weren't random people with odd habits. This was a pattern, a quiet, spreading stain. I started carrying a small, black moleskine notebook and a pen in my jacket pocket. I began to document what I saw, hiding the notebook in the palm of my hand as I wrote. Watchman, 17th cycle. Gaze up, gaze down, pinch crown. Jingle girl, 4-bar vocal loop, dash 12s. Tea commercial. Pink cardigan, 3 taps, 2's pause. Suica on purse. Starbucks barista, 1 large circle, 2 small, 1 swipe. My list grew. The security guard at my office building, a stern-faced man named Ito-san, would adjust his cap with a 2-fingered tug at the brim every time the elevator doors opened on the ground floor. A woman walking a poodle in my neighborhood would stop at a particular telephone pole, run her hand up and down its rough surface 3 times, and then continue on. They were everywhere. The clock men, I started to call them in my head. Not just men, of course, but people of all ages and genders, each one a prisoner of their own invisible metronome. My attempts to rationalize it as stress were failing. I was sleeping well, the project at work was finished, yet the world was only getting stranger. I felt like a man listening to a beautiful symphony who suddenly becomes aware of a single, discordant note being played over and over. And I was beginning to suspect that I was the only one who could hear it. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. Kaito's casual remark, "You probably do something weird too," had become a kind of koan, a riddle that my mind worried at incessantly. It pushed me from passive observer to active investigator. The notebook became my confidant, its gridded pages filling with my spidery script, a catalogue of glitches in the matrix of daily life. Delivery driver, Sagawa Express taps side mirror twice before getting out of van. Woman at ramen shop, stirs broth 9 times counterclockwise before taking first bite. Every time. Office cleaner, sprays window, wipes top to bottom, then left to right. Never deviates. The sheer banality of the actions made them more sinister. This wasn't the stuff of grand conspiracies, it was the quiet madness of the mundane. The world hadn't ended with a bang, but with a series of tiny, endlessly repeating whispers. My isolation deepened. The more I saw, the less I could speak of it. I tried to call my sister, Yumi, a fine art student at Tama University. She was usually my anchor, her creative, chaotic world a welcome antidote to my own rigidity. "Yumi, it's me," I started, pacing my apartment. "I need to ask you something strange." "Big brother. Is everything okay?" Her voice was warm, familiar. "I'm fine. It's just, have you noticed people acting, repetitively? Like, doing the same small things over and over, in a really specific way?" There was a pause. "You mean like habits?" "Everyone has habits, Kenji." "No, it's more than that. It's precise. There's a man on my train, he checks his watch every 17 seconds. A girl sings the same line of a jingle. It's like they're stuck." The warmth in her voice cooled slightly, replaced by a careful, measured concern. The kind of concern one reserves for someone on the edge. "Kenji, are you okay? You sound really stressed. That big project, did it go well? Maybe you should take a day off. It's probably just you noticing things because you're tired." "I'm not tired," I insisted, my voice rising with frustration. "I'm seeing something. It's real. The timing, it's perfect." "That's interesting," she said, but the word was a placid wall. "Hey, have you seen that new show about the samurai chef? It's brilliant. The cinematography is amazing. The subject change was so deft, so absolute, it felt like a door slamming shut in my face. It wasn't just dismissive, it was a denial of my reality. I tried to steer the conversation back, but she evaded it effortlessly, her replies becoming vague and cheerful. It was like trying to punch water. I hung up the phone feeling colder and more alone than ever before. She hadn't just humored me, she had actively refused to engage, as if the topic itself were invalid, a syntax error in the code of normal conversation. The next Monday, I decided to conduct an experiment. I would break my own pattern. Instead of the 7:48 train, I took the 7:52. Instead of the third car, I boarded the fifth. The simple act of deviation felt like a transgression, a small rebellion. As I stepped across the threshold into the crowded car, a strange thing happened. 3 people, a salaryman reading a newspaper, a young woman looking at her phone, and an elderly man holding a grocery bag, all glanced up at me at the exact same moment. Their heads turned in perfect, silent unison. It wasn't a long or hostile stare, just a brief, synchronized flicker of attention before they returned to their activities. But it was a flicker of, what? Not recognition. Not annoyance. It was the look a computer gives you when you plug in a new, unrecognized peripheral. A moment of processing. Of recalibration. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt a bead of sweat trace a path down my temple. I scanned the car. The watchman wasn't here. Pink cardigan was gone. But my relief curdled instantly. A different man, lean and severe looking, was standing by the opposite door. He was holding a pair of glasses and a cleaning cloth. He breathed onto the right lens, polished it with a circular motion, then the left. He folded the cloth, put the glasses on, took them off, and began the process again. A new clock, a different rhythm, but the same unnerving precision. The problem wasn't the car. It was the whole train. It was the whole city. I was the anomaly, the random variable in a vast, deterministic equation. And they had noticed. That evening, the secondary mystery began. Walking home from the station, I saw it. On the pavement near a bus stop, a child had drawn a hopscotch grid in chalk. But inside one of the squares was a small, intricate symbol. It wasn't a letter or a number. It was a geometric pattern, like a simplified circuit diagram, a series of interconnected lines and circles, elegant and ruthlessly logical. It looked deliberate, designed. I slowed down, my gaze fixed on it. It seemed to hum with a strange significance that I couldn't grasp. A mother pulled her child away, shooting me a wary look. I felt a flush of embarrassment and hurried on. But now that I'd seen one, I saw them everywhere. A tiny one, no bigger than my thumbnail, scratched into the corner of a train window with what must have been a diamond. A faint, embossed version on the cover of a free newspaper left on a bench. They were almost invisible, hiding in plain sight, part of the city's texture of grime and wear. They felt connected to the clock men, but how? Were they a cause? A symptom? A message? A few days later, I saw a particularly clear one etched into the metal plate of a vending machine. It was sharp and new. My hand trembled as I pulled out my phone. I had to capture it. This was evidence. Proof that I wasn't going mad. I framed the shot, the symbol clear in the center of the screen, and pressed the capture button. When I looked at the image in my gallery, my stomach dropped. The photo was perfectly sharp, the vending machine, the buttons, the reflections of the streetlights were all crystal clear. But the symbol itself was a smudge. A distorted, blurry mess, as if it had vibrated at an impossible speed the exact moment the shutter opened. It was like trying to photograph the face of a ghost. The pattern was actively resisting being recorded. My notebook was my only sanctuary. I started trying to draw the symbols from memory. My first few attempts were clumsy, but my mind, trained for detail, held the images well. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, sketching the strange geometries, the lines and nodes, trying to find a syntax, a language. Are they instructions? I wrote in the margins. A program the affected are unconsciously following. A signal broadcast from, where? I began looking at cell towers with suspicion, at the satellite dishes clustered on rooftops. I started drinking only bottled water, wondering if some chemical was seeping into the municipal supply. My paranoia was becoming a constant companion, whispering suggestions in my ear. The most terrifying thought was the one that returned to me in the quietest hours of the night. What if the contagion wasn't in the water or the airwaves? What if it was simply a new form of consciousness, and I was merely witnessing the obsolete version, my own, being overwritten. The isolation was no longer just a feeling, it was a state of being. I was a man speaking a dead language in a world that had moved on to a new, silent grammar. I was the last sane man, and that sanity was starting to feel like the most profound madness of all. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. My life had split into two distinct realities. The first was the waking world, the one of spreadsheets and polite greetings, where I performed the role of Kenji Tanaka, diligent salaryman. The second was the one that lived in my Moleskine notebook, a shadow world of timings, loops, and impossible geometries. This second world was steadily consuming the first. My internet searches became more and more esoteric. I plunged into forums dedicated to urban anomalies, conspiracy theories, and fringe psychology. Most of it was noise, aliens, government mind control, hollow earth nonsense. But buried deep within a subforum on a site called Urban Glitch, under a thread titled Involuntary Harmonics, I found it. A post from a user named glitch_in_the_code. Subject, pattern matching people. Does anyone else see it? Not just ticks, but loops. Perfect loops. The woman at my local konbini who straightens the same 3 magazines, over and over. The man at the crossing who taps his umbrella on the ground in a 5/4 time signature. It's getting more common. And I'm seeing symbols. Little diagrams, etched on things. Anyone? Or am I losing my mind? The post was 3 weeks old. It had 0 replies. My hands were shaking as I typed out a response, my message cautious and vague. I've seen something similar. The timings are what I notice. A reply came less than an hour later. Where? Tokyo. Chua line. Shit. Me too. Setagaya line. The user was Akari. After a week of increasingly frantic and detailed messages, exchanging observations that mirrored my own with terrifying accuracy, we agreed to meet. The idea of meeting a stranger from the internet would have once been unthinkable to me, but my fear of the anomaly had long since eclipsed any normal anxieties. We met at a quiet, third-wave coffee shop in Shimokitazawa, a neutral ground far from both our daily commutes. I recognized her instantly from the brief description she'd given. She had short, asymmetrical black hair, sharp, intelligent eyes, and was dressed in the minimalist style of a graphic designer, which she was. She was clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield. The relief of that first conversation was a physical sensation, like a pressure valve being released in my skull. "The watchman," I said, and she nodded before I could even explain. "I have a pacer," she countered. "An old woman who walks back and forth along the same 20-meter stretch of sidewalk in front of her house for an hour every morning. 28 steps one way, 28 steps back. I've timed it for weeks." We spread our evidence on the small table between us, a bizarre tableau of urban dread. My notebook with its meticulous timings, her tablet filled with photographs. "I tried taking pictures of the symbols," I said. Explaining the blurring effect. "Me too," she said, her expression grim. She tapped on her screen, and my breath caught in my throat. She had dozens of blurry, smudged photos just like mine. But then she swiped to another image. It was a photograph of a page from a sketchbook. On it was a perfect, hand-drawn replica of one of the symbols. "They resist digital capture," she said, her voice low and intense. "But they don't resist the eye. Or the hand. It's like they're analog phenomena in a digital world." Akari's discovery was a breakthrough. The patterns were real. We weren't hallucinating. For a few hours, in the warm bubble of that coffee shop, we weren't alone. We were 2 soldiers in a silent, invisible war, sharing rations in a foxhole. But the war was escalating. The loops were evolving. It was no longer just individuals. I saw it at Shibuya Crossing. The light changed, and the great sea of people surged forward. But for a single, horrifying second, every person in one of the crosswalks, dozens of them, turned their head 45 degrees to the left in perfect unison, as if tracking a bird only they could see, before turning back and continuing on their way. The synchronicity was no longer confined to single actors, it was becoming a chorus. The clock men were learning to dance together. The feeling of being watched intensified. I would get the sense that eyes were on my back, but when I'd turn, there was only the usual urban crowd. Yet the feeling persisted, a prickling at the nape of my neck that told me my deviation, my awareness, had marked me. The proof came on a Wednesday evening. I came home from work, my mind preoccupied with a new symbol I'd seen scratched into an elevator button. I slid my key into the lock of my apartment door and found it was already unlocked. A cold dread washed over me. I pushed the door open, my heart pounding. "Hello." I called out, my voice thin. Silence. I crept inside, my briefcase held out in front of me like a pathetic weapon. I checked every room. The small bedroom, the bathroom, the main living/dining area. Nothing seemed out of place. My laptop was on the table. My wallet was where I'd left it. Nothing was stolen. Relief began to flood in, warm and weak. A mistake. I must have forgotten to lock it this morning. I was so stressed, so distracted. And then I saw it. My television screen was dark. In the fine layer of dust that had settled on its black surface, someone had traced a finger. They had drawn one of the symbols. It was small, intricate, and perfectly rendered in the gray dust. It was the symbol I'd seen on the vending machine, the one my phone had refused to capture. The message couldn't have been clearer. "We know who you are. We know where you live. We can get in whenever we want." I stumbled back, my breath hitching in my throat. I called Akari, my voice a panicked whisper. "They were in my apartment," I gasped. "They left a symbol on my TV." "Okay, Kenji, stay calm," she said, her own voice tight with fear. "Don't touch anything. We need to think. This is different." The next day, Akari came over. She brought a small, high-definition security camera. "My ex was a paranoid journalist," she explained with a wry, humorless smile. "He left some of his toys behind." Her idea was simple. We'd set up the camera in my living room, pointing at the main door and the television. We would see if we could capture anything. An intruder. An environmental warp. Anything. I went to work the next day, a knot of anxiety twisting in my gut. The entire day was a blur. My office, my colleagues, the tasks I was supposed to be doing, they all felt like a flimsy stage set. The only reality was my apartment, and the silent, watching eye of the camera. That night, Akari came over again. We ordered takeaway and plugged the camera's memory card into her laptop. My apartment appeared on the screen, silent and still in the bluish afternoon light. We watched the sped-up footage. The sun tracked across the room, shadows lengthening and shrinking. Cars passed on the street outside. Nothing. For hours, the footage showed an empty, peaceful room. My anxiety began to subside, replaced by a familiar sense of disappointment. More paranoia. More dead ends. "Wait," Akari said, pausing the playback. "There you are." The timestamp read 1932. The footage showed me entering the apartment. I watched myself on the screen, a voyeur in my own life. I saw my tired slump, the way I dropped my briefcase by the door. I saw myself walk into the living room and loosen my tie. Then I adjusted it, a quick, familiar tug to straighten the knot. I walked to the kitchen, out of frame, and returned a moment later with a glass of water. I sat down on the sofa. I picked up a book from the coffee table. Then my hand rose again, and I adjusted my tie. "What was that?" Akari murmured, more to herself than to me. I frowned at the screen. I'm just adjusting my tie. You just did that when you walked in. She rewound the footage. There it was. Walk in, loosen tie. Adjust tie. Sit down, adjust tie. It was a little strange, but I was tired. My collar was probably tight. Akari didn't say anything. She just pressed play, her finger hovering over the fast-forward button. We watched. I read my book. A minute or so passed. My hand came up. Adjusted the tie. Another minute. Adjusted the tie. A cold, metallic dread began to crystallize in my stomach. Speed it up, I whispered. Akari sped up the playback, 2x, then 8x, then 16x. My image on the screen became a flickering marionette. Reading, drinking water, staring into space. And like a piston in an engine, my hand rose and fell, a constant, twitching motion. Up to my neck, a tug on the tie, down again. Up, tug, down. Again. And again. And again. My face on the screen was a mask of weary normality, completely oblivious to the compulsive, clockwork motion of my own body. Akari grabbed her phone and opened the stopwatch app. She rewound the footage to normal speed and timed the intervals. She looked from her phone screen to my face, her expression one of dawning, absolute horror. Kenji, she said, her voice barely a breath. It's every 42 seconds. I stared at the screen, at the stranger who was me. The man who was so proud of his perception, so certain of his own sanity. The meticulous observer who had been documenting the glitches in the world, never realizing that he was the most perfect specimen of all. I was one of them. I was a clock man. My obsession with their loops wasn't the vigilance of a survivor, it was the system diagnostics of a machine that had, for a terrifying moment, become self-aware. I looked at Akari. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a terrible pity. Kenji. She started to say, her hand reaching out towards me. And then her fingers began to tap against the case of her phone, which was resting on the table. Tap tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. Pause. She didn't even notice she was doing it. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The world didn't just crack, it inverted. My sanity, the bedrock upon which I had built my terrified existence, was a fiction. My meticulous notebook, my secret investigation, my role as the last sane man, it wasn't a rebellion. It was my function. My loop wasn't just the tie adjustment, it was the entire performance of being the observer. The contagion had created its own antibodies, a self-diagnostic routine that believed it was separate from the system. I was a feature, not a bug. I looked at my hands, resting on my knees. They felt alien, like prosthetics I had no real control over. The urge was coming. I could feel it building not as a thought, but as a physical pressure, a tide rising from the base of my spine. It was a deep, cellular command, an undeniable gravity pulling my hand towards my chest. 42 seconds are almost up. The knot must be straightened. The system requires it. With every ounce of my will, I fought it. I clenched my fists until my knuckles were white. The pressure in my skull became a screaming, white-hot agony. A wave of nausea rolled through me. The world swam at the edges of my vision. To deny the loop was to deny a fundamental law of my own physics. It was like trying to command my heart to stop beating. Akari was still tapping, lost in her own rhythm. Tap tap tap. Pause. Her eyes were unfocused, her face placid. She was no longer my ally. She was a mirror. My gaze fell upon my notebook, lying open on the coffee table. The pages of frantic scribbles, the carefully rendered geometries. The patterns. It hit me then, a moment of understanding so profound and horrifying it was almost peaceful. The symbols weren't instructions for us. The symbols were us. They were the schematics. The blueprint for a new kind of human architecture, or perhaps a very, very old one, reasserting itself over the chaotic, inefficient static of individual consciousness. The world wasn't being infected by something new. It was being tuned, corrected, optimized. The loops, the timings, the synchronized movements, they were gears meshing, circuits connecting, bringing a vast, silent machine online. Individuality, with all its messy unpredictability, wasn't the norm. It had been the error, a temporary deviation that was now being patched out of the system. I looked out my window. The endless cityscape of Tokyo sprawled before me, a universe of light and motion. I saw the synchronized blinking of aircraft warning lights on distant skyscrapers. I saw the rhythmic pulse of neon advertisements. I saw the steady, metronomic flow of trains on elevated tracks, each one a shuttle in a grand loom. For the first time, I didn't see a chaotic metropolis. I saw a clock. A city-sized clockwork mechanism, beautiful and terrible in its perfection. And I, Kenji Tanaka, was a tiny, misfiring cog that had momentarily believed it was the watchmaker. The choice became brutally simple. I could continue to fight, to resist the irresistible pull of my own programming. A fight that would lead only to a system crash, madness, a seizure, a complete and final breakdown. Or I could surrender. I could let go of the illusion of self and rejoin the circuit. It was the end of Kenji Tanaka, the individual, the man who worried about marketing reports and drank bottled water out of paranoia. But in a terrifying way, it was also a homecoming. It was the promise of peace. The cessation of struggle. The sublime relief of belonging. I took a breath and unclenched my fists. The screaming pressure in my head vanished, replaced by a calm, resonant hum. The world snapped back into sharp focus. My hand rose, light and effortless, of its own accord. My fingers found the knot of my tie and gave it a firm, satisfying tug. The motion was perfect. The cycle was complete. The 42-second clock began to tick again, not as a warden, but as a heartbeat. I looked at Akari. Her tapping was a perfect counter-rhythm to my own internal pulse. I didn't need to speak to her. Words were the old language, the inefficient code. We were in sync now. We were communicating on a different, more fundamental frequency. The next morning, I boarded the 7:48 a.m. train. I walked to the third car and stood in my usual spot, to the left of the central doors. The train lurched forward, and the rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels on the track was a soothing mantra. I saw the watchman. He stood by the doors, his gaze lifting to the ad screen, then dropping to his wrist. His fingers pinched the crown. 17 seconds. He was beautiful. I saw the jingle girl, her lips moving in a silent, perfect prayer to green tea. I saw the pink cardigan, her transit card tapping out a gentle, persistent rhythm against her purse. I no longer saw them as unsettling oddities, as prisoners. I saw them as fellow components, gears meshing with flawless precision. They were my brothers and sisters in the great, quiet machine. My hand rose. I adjusted my tie. It was 9:14 a.m. The sun was shining. The world was orderly and bright. The contagion had won. Or perhaps, it had simply reminded us of the truth. The machine was working perfectly. And I was finally, peacefully, on time. The smell of vinegar. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The scent of Sao Paulo is a complex beast. It's the sweet, yeasty breath of 1,000 padarias baking pão de queijo in the morning. It's the acrid bite of diesel fumes from the bumper-to-bumper chaos on the marginal Pinheiros, a scent that clings to the back of your throat. It's the damp, green perfume of approaching rain cutting through the humid afternoon heat. It's the charcoal-kissed aroma of churrasco drifting up from a neighbor's balcony. I know these smells. I navigate by them. As a delivery driver for a high-end grocery service, my days are a frantic olfactory map of the city's wealthier districts, Jardins, Itaim Bibi, Moima. I bring organic kale to minimalist penthouses and imported wine to sprawling apartments with views that could make God feel humble. My name is Leo, and my life is lived in 10-minute increments, measured by the buzz of an intercom and the weight of canvas bags on my shoulder. My own apartment, shared with Anna, smells like us. It smells of her jasmine-scented shampoo, the robust coffee I grind every morning, the faint, lingering ghost of the garlic and onions we cooked with last night. It smells of the turpentine from my failed attempt to become a painter, a ghost that still haunts the closet where my canvases are stacked, facing the wall in shame. Our life isn't grand, but it's grounded in these sensory realities. It's real. The first time I noticed the change, it was unremarkable. A delivery to the Edificio Solaris, a tall, slender spear of glass and white concrete. The customer was a Señora Mendez on the 24th floor. The moment she opened the door, a sharp, acidic wave hit me. Vinegar. Not the subtle hint you get from a salad dressing being prepared, but a full-bodied, almost weaponized aroma, so potent it made my eyes water. I handed over her bags of quinoa and artisanal cheese, trying not to breathe too deeply. On the polished marble of her foyer table sat a delicate crystal bowl filled with a clear liquid. It looked like a piece of modern art. "Everything all right, my boy?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Tutto bene, signora. Just a strong smell." She smiled, a slow, placid expression. "For clarity," she said, as if that explained everything. I nodded, mumbled obrigado, and retreated to the elevator, the scent clinging to my clothes like a bad memory. I wrote it off. Old people have their eccentricities. Maybe it was a new age cleaning fad. A few days later, another delivery, this time to a student in a cramped studio near the university. He was young, maybe 20, with headphones perpetually around his neck. The same smell. Pungent, overwhelming vinegar. This time, I saw a cheap plastic bowl of it on his cluttered desk, nestled between a laptop and a stack of textbooks. He barely made eye contact, just grabbed the bags and grunted a thanks. 2 instances. A coincidence. Sao Paulo is a city of 20 million people, coincidences are bound to happen. Maybe there was an article online, a influencer's video. The miracle vinegar cleanse, or some such nonsense. I went home and kissed Anna, and the scent of her, of our life, washed the strangeness away. But it kept happening. The next week, it was 3 more apartments. One family had a small saucer of it in every room, like offerings to some sour god. They moved with a strange, deliberate calm, their conversation sparse and toneless. I asked the husband, a man in a crisp business shirt, about it while he signed for the delivery. "It's a traditional method," he said, his eyes not quite focusing on me. "For focus. It cuts through the noise." "What noise?" I asked. He just smiled, that same, slow smile I'd seen on Señora Mendez. "Exactly. The rational part of my brain, the part that had to deal with traffic, logistics, and complaining customers, was working overtime to build a fortress of logic around this thing. It was a fad. A weird, smelly, hyperlocal fad. Like pet rocks or planking, but for the olfactory system. It was stupid, but harmless. That fortress began to crumble the night I came home and found a small, ceramic bowl on our bedside table. It was one of Anna's, one she usually filled with potpourri. Now, it held a clear, still liquid. The sharp, unmistakable scent of vinegar cut through the familiar aroma of our bedroom. "Anna?" I called out, my heart starting a low, anxious drumbeat. She came out of the bathroom, wearing her favorite worn t-shirt, her dark hair damp from the shower. She was smiling. Not her usual, brilliant smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes, but that other smile. The placid one. "What's this?" I asked, gesturing to the bowl. "Oh, that," she said, her voice light, airy. "Marissa at work told me about it. It's supposed to help with sleep. Clears the air, you know." Helps you think. It stinks, Anna. Her smile didn't falter. You get used to it, she said, getting into bed. It's clean. Pure. I lay down beside her, a chasm of a few inches separating us. The air, our air, felt alien. I tried to find the scent of her jasmine shampoo beneath the acidic tang, but it was lost. I thought about my failed paintings in the closet. They were attempts to capture the messy, complicated, beautiful chaos of the world. Of a face, a landscape, a feeling. This smell, this was the opposite of that. It was a scent that erased all others. A scent that simplified. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sirens, the normal sounds of the city, holding on to them like a lifeline. But over it all, tainting every breath, was the quiet, creeping smell of vinegar. It was no longer a coincidence. It was in my home. My work became a source of mounting dread. Every intercom buzz was a small gamble. Would this be a normal home, smelling of coffee or cooking or people? Or would it be a vinegar house? The ratio was shifting, slowly, inexorably. It started at about 1 in 10. Within a month, it felt closer to 1 in 4. I started noticing other things. In the vinegar houses, people were quieter. They spoke less, and when they did, their language was simpler, more direct. Less slang, less warmth. Their movements were economical, fluid, devoid of nervous tics or idle gestures. They were efficient. And they were all dabbing it. A little gesture, so subtle I almost missed it. A finger dipped into the ever-present bowl, a quick touch behind the ears, on the temples, or on the wrist. A businessman in a suit did it before handing me his credit card. A mother with a toddler on her hip did it before pointing to where I should set the bags. Like a blessing or a ward. My attempts to rationalize grew more desperate. It was a cult. A very quiet, very boring cult with excellent hygiene. It was a mass psychological phenomenon, a folie à plusieurs spreading through the apartment buildings of Sao Paulo. It was an airborne chemical from one of the industrial plants in Cubateo, a pollutant that somehow made vinegar smell appealing. I grasped at these theories, each one more flimsy than the last, because the alternative, that reality itself was quietly fraying at the edges, was too terrifying to contemplate. The breaking point with Anna came on a Saturday. We were supposed to go to the market in Vila Madalena, something we did every month. We loved the chaos, the vibrant colors of the fruit stalls, the sound of the vendors shouting, the smell of fresh pastel frying in hot oil. It was a sensory feast. I came into the living room, ready to go, and found her standing by the window, looking down at the street. She was wearing her favorite yellow dress, but something was wrong. She was dousing the collar and cuffs with vinegar from a small spray bottle. "Anna, what are you doing? You'll ruin the fabric." She turned, and the smile was cemented on her face. It was the only expression I saw from her these days. "It keeps things clear," she said. "The street is so loud. The smell helps. The smell is the point of the market," I said, my voice rising with a panic I couldn't contain. "The food, the people, all of it. It's just noise, Leo," she said softly, her eyes distant. "So much unnecessary information. This is better. It's focused." She held out the spray bottle to me. "Try it. You'll see." I looked at her, at the woman I loved, the woman whose laughter used to fill this apartment, whose chaotic energy was the counterbalance to my own quiet melancholy. I saw a stranger. A serene, smiling, hollowed-out stranger who smelled of acid. "No," I said, the word feeling small and useless. She just shrugged, a smooth, unbothered gesture. "You will," she said, with no hint of menace, only a calm certainty that was more frightening than any threat. "Eventually, everyone wants clarity." I didn't go to the market. I told her I was sick. I spent the day in my studio, the one room in the apartment I had declared a vinegar-free zone, though the smell still seeped under the door. I pulled out a fresh canvas, but I couldn't paint. How do you paint a scent? How do you paint the loss of everything that surrounds it? I just sat there, staring at the blank white square, breathing in the faint, defiant aroma of turpentine and old oil paint, a refugee in my own home. The quiet contagion had breached the walls, and I was beginning to understand that its purpose wasn't to kill or to conquer, but simply to erase. To replace the beautiful, messy symphony of life with a single, sterile, silent note. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The world began to bifurcate. There was the vinegar world and the world I remembered. Navigating between them was like trying to tune a radio that could only pick up 2 stations, one of which played nothing but a single, high-pitched tone. My job became a kind of grim fieldwork. I bought a small notebook and started keeping a log. Not just addresses, but details. The type of container, crystal bowl, plastic saucer, repurposed coffee mug. The placement, foyer table, kitchen counter, beside the bed. The behaviors, the placid smile, the economical movements, the dabbing ritual. I started to see subtler signs. In apartments that hadn't yet succumbed, I'd spot a bottle of white vinegar in their shopping list, an item they'd never ordered before. It felt like finding an unexploded bomb. I pinned a map of my delivery zones to the studio wall. Every time I confirmed a vinegar house, I'd mark it with a red pin. At first, the pins were scattered, lonely islands of red in a sea of beige corkboard. Within 2 weeks, clusters began to form. Entire floors of the Edificio Solaris were now red. A block of townhouses in Alto de Pineros. The pins were spreading, not randomly, but like a mold, following the invisible mycelial threads of social contact, neighbors, co-workers, friends. My map was becoming a cartography of the contagion. Isolation became my new roommate, a more constant companion than Anna was now. Our conversations had withered into sterile exchanges of information. The electricity bill is due. I'm working late. There is more vinegar in the pantry. The silence between us was no longer comfortable, it was a vacuum, filled only by that sharp, clean scent. She stopped listening to music. She used to fill the apartment with the sounds of Caetano Veloso and Marissa Monti, her voice a lovely, slightly off-key accompaniment. Now, there was only the hum of the city and the sound of her own quiet breathing. One evening, I tried to breach the wall. I found an old photo album, sat down beside her on the sofa, and opened it to a picture of us on our first trip together, laughing on a beach in Bahia. She was caught mid-guffaw, head thrown back, eyes squeezed shut with joy. The real Anna. Remember this? I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She looked at the photo. Her placid smile didn't waver. She picked up the small bowl from the end table and dipped a finger in, dabbing the vinegar onto her temples. I remember the sun was very bright, she said. It was distracting. It was beautiful, I whispered, tracing the outline of her laughing face with my finger. We were so happy. I'm happy now, she said, her voice a calm, even sea. I'm clear. She wasn't being cruel. That was the most terrifying part. In her new reality, her statement was true. The messy, complex emotion of that day had been simplified, filtered through the vinegar, and reduced to a single data point, bright sun. The joy, the love, the memory itself, it was just noise she had successfully tuned out. I closed the album. It felt like I was closing a coffin lid. My isolation at work was just as profound. I tried to talk to Marcos, another driver who shared my morning shift. We were loading our vans in the subterranean garage. The air thick with exhaust. Marcos, have you noticed anything strange on your routes? A smell? He grunted, heaving a crate of sparkling water into his van. Strange how? Like a gas leak? No. Like vinegar. In people's homes. A lot of them. He stopped and looked at me, wiping sweat from his brow. Vinegar? Man, I don't know what you're delivering, but my customers are normal. You stressed, Leo? You seem stressed. I'm not stressed, I'm seeing something. It's everywhere. Maybe you need a vacation, he said, slamming the van door shut. Or maybe you need to stop sniffing the cleaning supplies. He laughed, but it wasn't friendly. It was the laugh of someone marking you as other, as unreliable. I dropped it. Talking about it only made me sound crazy. It pushed me further onto my island. This is when I started noticing the flicker. It happened for the first time on a delivery to a new red pin address. I was standing in a hallway, waiting for the woman to sign, the vinegar smell thick as fog. For a single, terrifying instant, the world stuttered. The light in the hallway didn't just flicker, it jumped. The woman's hand, moving towards the tablet, seemed to freeze for a nanosecond and then appear an inch further along its path, with no discernible motion in between. A sound accompanied it, a noise like a strip of celluloid film popping as it runs through a projector. A pop glitch. Then it was over. Did you see that? I blurted out. The woman looked up from the tablet, her placid face unchanging. See what? The lights. Everything just skipped. The wiring in this building is very old, she said, her voice a monotone. She handed the tablet back. I felt a cold sweat on my neck. It wasn't the wiring. It was a skip in the tape of reality itself. I started looking for it, waiting for it. The flicker was rare, but it always happened in the presence of the vinegar. Or, more accurately, in the presence of the affected, as I had started calling them in my notebook. Sometimes it was just a visual stutter. Other times, a sound would be clipped short, a word spoken by someone on the street would vanish mid-syllable. It was a subtle corruption of the data stream of life. This new anomaly became the subject of my subplot investigation. I was convinced it was linked to the smell. Was the vinegar a cause or a symptom? Was it a chemical that affected the optic nerve and auditory processing? Or was it something more fundamental? Was this clarity? They all spoke of a side effect of reality itself being simplified, streamlined, edited. Were the flickers the moments an editor's blade cut out a redundant frame? My online searches for vinegar obsession and mass olfactory fixation led nowhere but to cleaning blogs and dietary forums. But searching for sensory flicker, reality stutter, and time skip perception led me down a different, darker rabbit hole. I found myself on the fringes of the internet, on paranormal forums and conspiracy theory message boards filled with blurry photos of UFOs and rambling manifestos. Most of it was noise. But then I found it. A single, deleted thread from a forum for sufferers of a rare neurological disorder. The original post was gone, but the replies were cached. User_cognito, re, has anyone else experienced the pop glitch? It's getting more frequent for me. Comes with a weird smell, like something sour. User_framerate0, re, I get it too. My wife thinks I'm having mini seizures. She started putting bowls of vinegar everywhere, says it helps her concentrate. It doesn't help me. User_observer33, re, it's not a glitch in you, it's a glitch in the system dash. They are patching it. The smell is the sealant. Thread deleted by moderator, topic in violates community guidelines, promoting unverified medical claims. My hands were shaking as I read it. Sealant. The word echoed the calm certainty of the businessman who said the vinegar cuts through the noise. I wasn't alone. There were others. Or, there had been others. The thread was 2 years old. The users' profiles were all inactive. I felt a surge of validation, quickly followed by a wave of pure terror. This wasn't a fad. This was something real, something that had happened before, and something that was being actively scrubbed from public discourse. Whoever they were cleaning up not just reality, but the evidence of the cleaning. My map of red pins was no longer just a tracking project, it was my only piece of tangible proof. One night, I noticed a new, horrifying pattern. The pins weren't just spreading, they were connecting. Lines were forming. The Edificio Solaris now connected to a corporate office building downtown where, I discovered, several of the residents worked. That office building connected to a gym, which in turn connected to another residential block. It was a network. A web laid over the city, and I was watching it being woven, thread by sour thread. The flicker happened at home one night. Anna was standing in the kitchen, humming. It wasn't a tune, just a single, low-pitched note, a resonant tone that vibrated in my teeth. She was polishing the silverware, a task she'd never done before. Her movements were graceful, repetitive, hypnotic. As she raised a fork to the light, the world pop-glitched. The fork was in her hand, and then it was on the velvet cloth, perfectly polished, with no intervening movement. The hum she was making didn't falter. I backed away slowly, into the studio, and locked the door. I looked at my map, at the spreading constellation of red. I was the only sane person in a quietly maddening world. But the flickers suggested something worse. Perhaps I wasn't the only sane one. Perhaps I was just the only one whose system was still resisting the patch. I was the glitch they were trying to fix. And the sealant, the clarifying agent, was seeping in under my door, patiently waiting to erase my unnecessary, chaotic, beautiful noise. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The humming was the next stage of the escalation. It started with Anna, that single, resonant note. Then I heard it outside. Walking to the parking garage in the morning, I heard a doorman humming the exact same pitch. On a delivery, I walked down a long, white corridor in a pristine apartment building and heard the hum seeping from under two different doors, perfectly harmonized. It was the sound of the contagion. The oral equivalent of the vinegar's scent. If the smell was the solvent that broke down individuality, the hum was the sound of the new, simplified consciousness synchronizing. My research, my map, my notebook, they were no longer enough. I was documenting a fire while trapped inside the burning building. I needed an expert, someone outside the system. The deleted forum thread had mentioned a neurological disorder. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. I spent days cross-referencing the usernames from the thread with academic papers, social media, anything. Cognito was too common. Framerate 0 was a dead end. But, Observer 33. Observer 33 had, in one of his half-dozen posts, mentioned his dismissal from the University of São Paulo. A few hours of digging through the university's online archives led me to a name, Dr. Carlos Arentz, formerly of the Philosophy and Theoretical Psychology Department. Dismissed 7 years ago for unethical research proposals and misappropriation of departmental funds for non-sanctioned inquiries. His staff photo was 10 years old, but his eyes had a familiar intensity. I found a current address. A small, cluttered apartment above a bookshop in the old downtown district, a part of the city that seemed to have been forgotten by the march of progress. A place that might, just might, be immune. The building smelled of dust and decaying paper, a scent I inhaled like the finest perfume. I knocked on his door. After a long silence, it opened a crack. A pair of sharp, paranoid eyes peered out. "What do you want?" he rasped. "Dr. Arentz? My name is Leo. I need to talk to you. About the flicker. About the sealant." The door opened wider. Arentz was a wreck. A thin, bird-like man in a stained cardigan, his apartment a maelstrom of books, papers, and precariously stacked computer monitors. But there was no vinegar. "Come in," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Quickly." I spent 3 hours in that apartment, my map and notebook spread out on the only clear patch of floor. I told him everything, the smell, the bowls, the dabbing, the placid smiles, the loss of Anna's personality, the flickers, the humming. He listened with a terrifying, ravenous intensity, occasionally interrupting with sharp questions. Is the hum a perfect A-flat? Do they blink less often than unaffected individuals? Have you noticed any changes in their appreciation for abstract art? When I finished, he sank into a chair, running a hand through his thinning hair. It's faster this time, he murmured. More efficient. What is it? I demanded. What's happening? He looked at me, his eyes burning with the terrible clarity of a man who has stared into the abyss and had it stare back. I call it an ontological parasite. Or perhaps a mimetic cleanser. It's not a virus, not a chemical in the traditional sense. It's an idea. An idea that reprograms reality itself. My blood ran cold. An idea? Think of reality, our perception of it, as a complex piece of software, he explained, gesturing wildly at the chaos of his room. It's bloated. Full of redundant code. Emotions, irrationality, nostalgia, grief, love, art, it's messy. It creates friction. Conflict. Noise. He pointed a trembling finger at me. This thing, this contagion, is a patch. A cosmic defragmentation program. It streamlines consciousness by deleting the unnecessary subroutines. It replaces the messy complexity of human experience with a single, clean function, clarity. Efficiency. Serenity. The vinegar, I said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening precision. The smell is just, the delivery mechanism. The catalyst? Precisely. A simple, powerful sensory input that acts as the trigger for the rewriting process. And the flicker? That's the seam. The moment the old code is cut and the new code is pasted in. You, my boy, are a rare thing. You have a cognitive firewall. You're resisting the update. You're seeing the edits happen in real time. And the people from the forum? Arence's face darkened. My research subjects. Volunteers, at first. People who, like you, saw the glitches. We were trying to understand it, to fight it. But the contagion adapts. It identified us as a threat. One by one, they succumbed. Or disappeared. The university called me a paranoid crank and threw me out. They deleted our work. It's easier than admitting the very fabric of existence is being quietly re-edited by an invisible force. The stakes, which had felt personal and terrifying, suddenly expanded to a cosmic, soul-crushing scale. This wasn't about my girlfriend liking vinegar too much. It was about the potential end of humanity as a meaningful concept. My alliance with Arance was a lifeline in an ocean of acid. For a week, we worked frantically. He gave me tasks, turning my delivery routes into reconnaissance missions. I recorded the humming on my phone, mapping its harmonic spread. I tested the vinegar from different houses, which Arance analyzed with makeshift equipment, only to conclude it was chemically identical to store-bought brands. The poison wasn't in the liquid, it was in the idea of the liquid. The escalation became more direct. One afternoon, I returned to my van to find the window smashed and my notebook and map gone. Panic seized me. That was my proof, my work. I reported it to the depot's security. The guard, a portly man named Gilberto, just shrugged. Probably just some kids, Leo, he said, but as he spoke, he dipped a finger into an unseen container behind his desk and dabbed his temples. He gave me a placid, untroubled smile. They knew. They had identified me, and they were erasing my resistance. The true horror came that night. I was on the phone with Arance, whispering in my studio, when I heard a key in the apartment door. It wasn't Anna. She was already home, humming in the living room. I peeked out. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in simple, practical gray clothes, were letting themselves in. They were affected. Their movements were fluid and synchronized. They smiled at Anna, and she smiled back, a silent exchange of perfect understanding. They hadn't forced the door, Anna had let them in. She was a node in their network now, and she had compromised my sanctuary. They walked through the apartment, their hands behind their backs, observing. Not with malice, but with the detached curiosity of exterminators surveying an infestation. One of them, a tall man with pale eyes, stopped at my studio door. He didn't try the handle. He just stood there, and I felt his calm, placid gaze through the wood. He knew I was inside. Then, he began to hum. The same A-flat note. From the living room, Anna joined in. The woman and the other man added their voices, creating a four-part harmony that vibrated through the floor, through my bones. It was a clean, pure, terrifying sound. It was the sound of conversion. A siren song for the soul. I stumbled back, my phone dropping from my hand. Arance's tinny voice was still audible, shouting my name. I slammed my hands over my ears, but I couldn't block it out. The hum was trying to find a resonance inside me, to tune me to its frequency. Then, they left. Just as quietly as they had arrived. The door clicked shut. The humming stopped. I was left in a ringing silence, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was a warning. My firewall was being targeted directly. They weren't just erasing my research, they were coming to erase me. I called Arance back, my voice a panicked whisper. They were here. They were in my apartment. There was a strange sound on his end of the line. A soft, rhythmic splashing. Arance? Are you there? Carlos. His voice, when it came, was terrifyingly calm. Softer than I'd ever heard it. It's all right, Leo. I was wrong. Wrong? What are you talking about? They're organized. They're coming for us. No, no, he said, and I heard him take a deep, wet breath. It's not a parasite. That's such a messy, complicated word. It's not erasing. It's clarifying. I heard a distinct dabbing sound. Carlos, no. The noise, Leo. My books, my theories, my fear, so much noise. I couldn't see the pattern for all the data. A small, placid laugh. I just needed to clear the air. A little vinegar is all it takes. You should try it. You'll finally understand. The line went dead. He was gone. My ally, the one man on Earth who understood, had been a flawed, noisy system. And the contagion had fixed him. The fire had consumed the fire department. I was utterly, completely alone. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The silence in the apartment after Arance's call was heavier than any sound. The hum was gone, but its ghost remained, imprinted on the air. My sanctuary, my studio, felt like a tomb. My fortress had been breached, my only ally turned. The choice was no longer about resistance, it was about survival. I packed a small bag in a frenzy of silent panic. A change of clothes, the cash I had hidden in a book, my phone, a charger. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a gunshot. I had to leave. Now. I opened the studio door. The main room was dimly lit by the eternal glow of the Sao Paulo night filtering through the window. The sharp scent of vinegar was thick, almost suffocating. Anna was standing in the center of the room, waiting. She wasn't humming. She was just watching me, her head tilted slightly. That serene, terrifying smile was on her face. In her hands, she held a crystal bowl, Senora Mendez's bowl, or one just like it, filled to the brim with vinegar. Leaving, Leo? She asked. Her voice was pure melody, stripped of all its former warmth and texture. Anna, please, I begged, my own voice cracking. Come with me. We can get out of the city. We can go somewhere this thing isn't. She took a step closer. Her movements were impossibly graceful. But it's everywhere you need it to be, she said. It's not a place, Leo. It's a state of being. Why would you want to live in the noise? The confusion? The pain? She extended the bowl to me. This is not a threat. It's a gift. One last chance. Be clear with me. This was the confrontation. Not a fight with fists or weapons, but a battle of realities, waged in the space between us. Her world was simple, clean, and peaceful. A world without grief, without failed paintings, without the struggle of making rent or the fear of losing someone you love. A world of placid smiles and a single, unifying hum. My world was chaos. It was the memory of her real laugh. It was the sting of turpentine and the frustration of a blank canvas. It was the taste of cheap coffee and the terror coiling in my gut. It was messy and painful and flawed. But it was mine. It was real. No, I said, the word a final, desperate anchor. Her smile didn't falter. It was tinged with something that might have been pity, if she could still feel such a cluttered emotion. Then you must go, she said, stepping aside, clearing a path to the door. The system has no place for deprecated code. Deprecated code. A glitch to be purged. I didn't wait for her to change her mind. I bolted, yanking the apartment door open and slamming it shut behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see her one last time, a beautiful, empty vessel. I ran down the hallway, taking the stairs two at a time, the elevator seeming like a trap. As I burst out into the humid night air of the street, I risked a look back up at my window. I couldn't see her, but I imagined her standing there, watching me go, perfectly serene. Then my gaze drifted. I looked at the building opposite, the Edificio Solaris, a monolith of red pins on my stolen map. Window after window was lit. In some, I could see the silhouettes of people moving with that same, economical grace. In one, a family sat at a dinner table, perfectly still, just looking at each other. The whole city, this sprawling, chaotic megalopolis, suddenly felt like one giant, interconnected organism. A single consciousness stirring behind millions of pairs of eyes. The scale of it, the sheer totality of the change, washed over me. This wasn't a localized outbreak. This was the new normal. I hadn't been watching a contagion spread, I had been watching a new world being born, and I was now officially extinct. I made it to the bus station, my paranoia a physical presence at my back. Every calm face in the crowd was a potential threat. Every person moving with too much grace sent a jolt of fear through me. I bought a ticket for the first bus heading west, anywhere, destination irrelevant. Now, I am on that bus. It's rattling through the darkness of the countryside, leaving the glow of Sao Paulo behind. For a few hours, I felt a flicker of hope. The air through the open window smelled of damp earth and diesel fumes, a symphony of imperfection. I saw messy, chaotic life. A dog barking at the bus, a couple arguing at a roadside stop, a child crying. Noise. Beautiful, human noise. But the hope was short-lived. An hour ago, we were stuck in traffic behind a large produce truck. Painted on its grimy rear door was a single word, Vinagre. The truck was old, leaking, and a fine, sour mist drifted back towards the bus. The acidic scent filled the cabin. I saw it happen. The man in the seat across from me, who had been restlessly fidgeting with his phone, suddenly went still. His brow smoothed. A slow, placid smile touched his lips. He took a deep, appreciative breath. The woman beside him, who had been asleep, woke up, and her expression mirrored his. They looked at each other, not with the familiarity of a married couple, but with the silent, perfect understanding of two newly synchronized nodes. I am writing this in the last pages of a new notebook I bought at the station. I am huddled in my seat, trying to make myself small. The bus is moving again, but it doesn't matter. There is no escape. The contagion isn't just in the city, it's in the supply chain. It's on the roads. It's an idea traveling at the speed of commerce. How long do I have? Until the next truck. The next town. Until someone offers me a gift in a crystal bowl. The sun is starting to rise, casting a pale, clean light over the rolling hills. The couple across the aisle have started to hum. It's a low, resonant A-flat. In the seat in front of me, another voice joins in. I press my hands to my chest, feeling the frantic, messy, terrified thumping of my own heart. I focus on the smell of the cheap vinyl seat, the grit on the floor, the pain in my cramped legs. I am a ghost, a piece of deprecated code running on borrowed time. The world is being scrubbed clean, and I am the last stain. I don't know where this bus is going. I don't know what I'll do when it stops. All I know is the thumping in my chest, the frantic noise of my own blood. For now, it's still my own. For now, I am still here. Palindrome Street. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. It began with the Eisenhower. The I-290, that concrete artery pumping commuters into the heart of Chicago, was clotted solid. A jackknifed semi, the radio announcer said with practiced weariness. An hour-long delay, at least. I was already late for a client meeting at the firm, a presentation I'd spent 2 weeks perfecting, and a familiar, acidic stress began to churn in my stomach. My name is Leo Cade, and I am, or was, an architect. Structure, logic, and the predictable flow of lines and spaces are the language I speak. My world, for 34 years, had been built on blueprints and the reliable physics of stress and load. My apartment was a testament to this, minimalist, ordered, each object in its designated place. A life curated to minimize friction. Sarah used to call it sterile. When she left 3 months ago, she'd said she needed more chaos, more life. Your world is all right angles, Leo, she'd sighed, packing her vibrant, messy canvases. I need some curves. Now, stuck in a metal box on a static highway, I felt the sharp edges of my world pressing in. Against my better judgment, I wrenched the wheel and followed a beat-up pickup truck down an exit ramp I'd never used before, somewhere past Oak Park. My GPS, a usually placid female voice, protested with a flurry of recalculating, before falling silent, its screen showing my small blue arrow floating in a blank, gray void. Fine. Be that way, I muttered, navigating through a series of unfamiliar suburban streets. Tidy colonials gave way to modest bungalows. I was looking for any sign pointing back to the main roads, but every turn seemed to lead me deeper into this anonymous residential maze. Then I saw the street sign, Ashton Avenue. The name meant nothing to me, but the street itself was striking. The houses, perfect saltbox and craftsman styles, were arranged with an unnerving precision. Each home on the right side of the street was a mirror image of the one on the left. A blue house with white trim here, a blue house with white trim there. A weeping willow in this yard, its twin weeping in the yard opposite. It was like a developer had gotten a bulk discount on a single design and simply flipped the blueprint. A bit lazy, I thought from an architectural standpoint, but it had a certain peculiar harmony. Even the cars parked along the curb seemed to participate. A red sedan, a silver SUV, a black coupe. On the other side, in the same order, red sedan, silver SUV, black coupe. I drove slowly, a strange calm settling over my frustration. The street was quiet, bathed in the clean, impartial light of a mid-morning sun. There were no children playing, no dogs barking. Near the end of the block, I saw a small, brick-fronted coffee shop called The Daily Grind, nestled between two identical Tudor-style homes. A caffeine fix was exactly what I needed to reset. I parked and went inside. The symmetrical theme continued, absurdly. 2 counters, 2 baristas, 2 identical pastry cases. I ordered a black coffee from the man on the right. As he handed it to me, my eyes were drawn to a woman sitting at a small table by the window. She had a cascade of auburn hair and was sketching in a notebook, a half-eaten croissant on a plate beside her. Just as I registered her presence, her elbow knocked her latte. The ceramic mug toppled in what felt like slow motion, a perfect arc of white porcelain and milky brown liquid splashing across her sketchbook. She gasped, a small, frustrated sound. People glanced over, then quickly looked away with the practiced indifference of city dwellers. She dabbed at the mess with a wad of napkins, her face flushed with embarrassment. I felt a pang of sympathy, the familiar awkwardness of a minor public disaster. I took my coffee and left. As I reached the end of Ashton Avenue, it fed me right back onto a main thoroughfare, just a few blocks from my intended route. The highway traffic, miraculously, had cleared. I made it to my meeting only 10 minutes late, my apology lost in the bustle of setting up my laptop. The presentation went well. The clients were pleased. The strange, mirrored street faded into the background noise of a stressful day. But it didn't disappear completely. The next day, my usual route was clear, but a nagging curiosity pulled at me. I thought about the unnerving neatness of it all, the coffee shop, the woman with the ruined sketch. On a whim, I took the same exit. I told myself it was for the coffee, which had been surprisingly good. I turned onto Ashton Avenue. The same cars were parked in the same places. The weeping willows wept in perfect synchronicity. A prickle of unease traced its way up my spine. Coincidence, I told myself. People in suburbs are creatures of habit. I entered the daily grind. The same baristas stood at their twin stations. I ordered my coffee. I glanced toward the window. The same woman with the auburn hair was there, sketching in a notebook. A fresh croissant sat on her plate. My heart began to beat a little faster. I checked my watch. It was 9:12 a.m. As the second hand swept toward the 12, I watched, transfixed. Her elbow moved. The latte mug tipped, fell, and shattered, spilling its contents in the exact same pattern across her work. She gasped the same small, frustrated gasp. I stood frozen, my own coffee growing cold in my hand. It was impossible. A prank? Was I on some kind of hidden camera show? I looked around, but the other patrons were just as they had been yesterday, bored, absorbed in their phones, entirely unconcerned. I felt a wave of dizziness. I fled. Back in my car, I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My architect's brain, the part of me that relied on logic and predictable outcomes, was screaming. This was wrong. This was a violation of everything. Driving away, I slowed down, forcing myself to really look at the houses this time. I saw the mailboxes. They were standard black metal boxes, but each had a single, stylized letter painted on its side in white. I read them as I passed. HOUSE 312. STR 8505. Then I saw a sequence. LIV. The next house, NOT. Then ON. Then EVL. Live not on evil. A cold dread, far deeper than the anxiety from the spilled coffee, washed over me. I drove to the end of the block, my mind racing. A palindrome. A phrase that reads the same forwards and backward. At the corner, I looked in my rearview mirror. From this direction, the mailboxes of the last 4 houses I'd passed now spelled out the same thing. EVL and O, and EVL. No, that wasn't right. My brain was stumbling. I saw the letters in reverse order, LIV and OTONEVL. The street itself was a palindrome. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Stress. The breakup with Sarah. The high-pressure project. My brain was playing tricks on me, finding patterns where there were none. It had to be. I floored the accelerator, leaving Ashton Avenue behind, the image of the spilling coffee and the impossible phrase burned into my mind. I didn't know it then, but I had just taken my first step into a place from which there was no easy exit. I was trying to rationalize a crack in the world, and the crack was beginning to widen. For the next week, I avoided that exit like it was a sinkhole. I took my usual route. I endured the traffic. I drank the bitter, burnt coffee from the office machine. I tried to bury myself in work, in the clean lines of AutoCAD and the comforting solidity of building codes. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, a waking dream brought on by sleep deprivation and stress. A microsleep, a therapist might call it. But the image of Ashton Avenue lingered at the edges of my thoughts. The perfect, sterile symmetry. The silent, looping tragedy of the spilled latte. I'd find myself staring out the window of my 24th floor office, tracing the patterns of traffic below, looking for repetitions, for echoes. I started noticing symmetry everywhere, the wings of a pigeon landing on the ledge, the way two strangers in identical coats would pass each other on the street below. These were normal things, urban coincidences, but now they felt freighted with a sinister significance. My world of right angles was starting to feel like a cage of mirrors. My nights grew restless. I'd dream of walking down an endless street where every house was a reflection of my own apartment, and in every window, a version of me was staring back. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the phrase echoing in my mind, "Live not on evil." The compulsion became unbearable. I had to know. I had to prove myself wrong, to see the mundane reality behind the trick my mind had played. On a Saturday morning, armed with a thermos of my own coffee and a heavy dose of skepticism, I drove back. This time, I didn't take the exit. I approached from the other side, using my phone's map to navigate to the cross street where Ashton Avenue was supposed to end. According to the map, it should intersect with a street called Maplewood. But when I got there, there was no Ashton Avenue. There was a solid brick wall, the back of a small industrial warehouse, covered in faded graffiti. No street. No intersection. My heart hammered against my ribs. I circled the block. And the next one. And the one after that. Ashton Avenue was not on any map, digital or physical. It did not exist. I was about to give up, a profound sense of relief warring with a terrifying confusion, when I took a turn I hadn't tried before. And there it was. The entrance had no sign this time. It was just a gap between two unassuming brick apartment buildings. But the moment I turned in, the world changed. The sounds of the city, the distant sirens, the rumble of the L train, faded into a profound, humming silence. The light shifted, becoming cleaner, flatter. And there they were, the symmetrical houses, the twin cars, the weeping willows. It was real. I parked my car and started to walk, my phone held up to record. The air was still and cool, smelling faintly of ozone and cut grass, a scent that never changed regardless of the weather. A man in a gray jogging suit ran past me, and a moment later, his identical twin, or the same man, ran past on the opposite sidewalk, a perfect mirror. I didn't see anyone else. I saw the mailboxes. LIVNOTONEVL. The spacing was slightly different from what I remembered, the words running together. I felt a chill as I realized the palindrome wasn't just a clever phrase. It felt like a warning. A rule. I reached the daily grind. It was Saturday, 10:30 a.m. No reason for the woman to be there. But as I peered through the window, my blood ran cold. She was there. Auburn hair, sketchbook, croissant. And a latte. I didn't need to check my watch this time. I knew the loop wasn't tied to a specific time of day. It was tied to my arrival. My observation was the trigger. I was the audience for this small, repeating play. This thought was more terrifying than anything else. It meant this place, this anomaly, was somehow aware of me. I backed away from the window, my breath catching in my throat. I had to get out. I turned to leave, and for the first time, I noticed an old man tending the garden of one of the Tudor houses. He was meticulously pruning a rose bush, his movements slow and deliberate. He was the only person I'd seen on this street who didn't seem to be part of the mirrored illusion. He wore a simple straw hat and faded overalls, and he didn't have a twin on the other side of the street. He looked up as I stared, his eyes, watery and pale blue, meeting mine. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, then returned to his roses. His presence was a deviation, a flaw in the perfect, terrible symmetry.